Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming along on Monday the 15th of October to the Special Licensing Subcommittee of Haringey Council. There's one substantial item on the agenda this evening, which is of course the review of the licence to Live Nation Festival Republic at Finsbury Park. I'm going to start with some introductions going round, starting from me and then going round. My name is Councillor Vincent Carroll. I shall be chairing this evening.
I'm Councillor Sarah Williams.
I'm Glenn Barnfield, the Principal Committee Coordinator.
I'm Michelle Williams, Legal Advisor.
Asita Ranatunga, I'm a barrister, Legal Advisor to the committee.
Dahlia Barrett, Haringey Licensing Officer.
Simon Farrow, Commissioning Manager for the Public Realm for Parks.
Hubert Malcolm, Head of Community Safety and Enforcement, representing the Licensing Authority.
I'm David Murray, the Interim Assistant Director, Environment and Neighbourhoods with Haringey Council.
Sarah Jones, the Events and Partnerships Manager for Haringey Council.
Lucy Cohen, resident and witness.
Alexa Skeets, Hackney resident and witness.
Christian Bonato, Hackney resident witness.
Charles Street, and I'm a barrister and counsel for Friends of Finsbury Park.
Good evening, Richard Vivian from Big Sky Acoustics. I'm an expert in the assessment and control of noise.
Tom Palin, previous chair of the Friends of Finsbury Park and also witness.
Susan Ring, solicitor at Harrison Grant, acting for the Friends of Finsbury Park.
Magdalena Gray, also solicitor at Harrison Grant.
Melvin Benn, licence holder.
Philip Colvin, Queen's Counsel and the barrister for the licensee.
Simon Taylor, solicitor for the licence holder.
Good evening, Jim Griffiths, acoustic consultant for Vanguardia and acting for Live Nation.
Councillor Luke Corley-Harrison. Thank you very much, everyone. A longer round of introductions than usual, but that's to be expected. The other bits of housekeeping are to note on filming at meetings. This is being recorded and webcast live, and it will be retained for subsequent viewing if necessary. So by taking part in the meeting, you accept that you may be captured either audibly or visually by that recording. So if you don't accept that, then I suppose now is the time to leave, because we do intend to continue. Apologies for absence, none, I believe, Glenn. Yeah. And no urgent business. Declarations of interest, members, any? No, I shall make one. I was a paying customer at an event, the Queens of Stone Age, the summer just gone, but I will ask Ms Williams. I don't think that's a prejudicial interest. Do you, Ms Williams?
Chair, I can confirm that that isn't a prejudicial interest that would preclude you from determining this appeal, this review.
Thank you very much. And so I assume everyone has more or less got themselves around the summary of procedures for what we'll be doing this evening. As the applicant is the applicant for review, we'll be, after a short introduction by licensing officers, we should be progressing to the Friends of Finsbury Park's case, and we have the registered speakers here, and you'll all be given ample time to speak. I'm suggesting 3 minutes each, and you don't have to use all of that, and you don't have to feel that you need to repeat anything said, or on the other hand, leave out anything not said. Members will take on board everything that's said, and then after that there will be questions. Members will question the witnesses, and when we have heard from everyone, then the licence holder does have the opportunity also to question the applicant for the review. So that would be probably the last thing done this evening, and then as you'll know from the papers, this is the first of 2 scheduled days, so tomorrow, it will go in reverse order, I suppose. The licence holder will then be making their presentation to the committee, and similarly, the applicant will have the ability to cross-examine them and question them. So everyone will have their in and their say, and there will also be opportunity for summing up tomorrow evening, which the licence holder will have the right of final reply, and then we will go away, us three on the panel will go away and deliberate and make a decision, and that will be handed down within the 5 days as set out. I think now we will go to the presentation by licensing officer, please.
So, sir, just before we do that, I understand from Mr. Streeton, on behalf of Friends of Finsbury Park, he wants to raise an issue with regards to Miss Barrett.
Yes, sir. It's not something I've ever done before, but I'd like to make an application that you exclude Miss Barrett's report and that you don't hear from her on the basis that she is apparently biased against my client. So that falls under a number of limbs, but it needs to be viewed in the context of this authority having a financial interest in the events run in Finsbury Park. So things are more sensitive in this regard than they might sometimes otherwise be. It is unusual, to say the least, that this authority has also waived the potential conflict that Mr. Colvin might have had, who previously represented this authority against my client, and allowed him to represent the commercial party here in front of the council that was previously his client. That sets the context for this application, because both of those things mean that this is both unusual and highly sensitive. As I said, the application is to exclude her report and anything that she may seek to say to you, and it's on the basis that she is apparently biased, firstly, because of correspondence that was disclosed to my client under a Freedom of Information Act request, which only came to me today. I think it may have come to my instructing solicitor late yesterday. No, it came at 1 o'clock to my solicitor today, so we have not had long to deal with this. But in essence, what that shows is Miss Barrett working, as I would put it, hand in glove with the commercial operator. And to give you an example, she is seeking to agree conditions with the operator under what power I'm not clear, bearing in mind that she is not representing the responsible authority. She is apparently here in an independent capacity to advise you. But in relation to conditions, she refers to the operator and says, let me know what you think. Some of this happens in any event, and best practice in the way that Festival Republic works. It seems a bit tedious to have to condition this due to the situation we are in. She sends over a list of names of people who attend, which was sent to all parties, saying this might come in useful. She used abbreviations and names for people which show a familiarity. And if you go in her report to paragraphs 14.1 to 14.3, you will see that she herself draws a distinction between the licensing authority as responsible authority and the administrative capacity of the officer who advises the committee. And she refers there to the National Section 182 guidance, which is quite clear that it's important to achieve a separation of responsibilities between what the responsible authority has to say and what the person who advises you, acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, has to say. Those are two very different roles, and what appears to have happened here is that the officer who should be independent and giving you independent advice has engaged herself with negotiating and engaging with one of the parties, but not with others, including my client. She's had discussions with them. She's referred to discussions that are being had with other parties, including Islington Council, with them, and it's a process that my client has been completely locked out of. So the first ground upon which we say she is apparently biased is the nature of that correspondence with the commercial party. The second is that she has been, to use the words of one of my clients, obstructive in seeking to deal with my client throughout this process, and we have had trouble with access to documents. My documents came in hard copy yesterday. My clerks tried to get them off the internet, my expert tried to get them off the internet, my solicitor tried to get them off the internet. None of them could get them off the internet, and the response from Ms Barrett was, well, the link works and it's your problem. It's simply not acceptable for someone who has behaved in that way to us to be using, as I say, terms of endearment, essentially, describing someone as Rocky, using casual names and acting hand in glove with a commercial operator in circumstances where she is not the responsible authority. She is not to negotiate on behalf of this authority. That's the job of the responsible authority. She is supposed to be independent and advising you in a quasi-judicial capacity, and that is not what she has done. So, as I say, it's extremely rare. In fact, it's the only time I've ever done this. But my client is in a position where the person who should be giving you independent advice is, we say, at least apparently biased against us. It's in the context of a case which is highly sensitive, not least because we've litigated against the council before, and the council has waived the conflict to allow a barrister who previously acted for the council to act against us, and in the context where the council stands to gain financially from its decision. So in that context, we say that you cannot rely on anything Ms Barrett says to you.
What's your proposed solution?
That her report be excluded, and that she does not present anything to this authority, that you decide the matter on the basis of submissions made to you, and you ignore anything she has to say.
Is there anything in this report that you specifically take issue with?
We take issue with the thrust of the report, and I could go through it and deal with places where we take issue. But just to give you an example, if you go within the report to the section which deals with the use of expletives, which you will find at 7.2, we say that Ms Barrett's approach is extremely surprising in light of what national guidance has to say. If you go to 7.5, she says, Haringey is unable to control the language that's being used by the various artists as part of their artistic expression of music. The genre is not something that can be conditioned in a licence. The artist can claim artistic rights. It's very difficult to demonstrate a causal link of harm to children. And then above that, at 7.4, although she admits that expletives are unpleasant, she says they're heard in everyday life, including on the television. Well, the national guidance, and this is something I would have dealt with in submission, is quite clear that expletives are, or that bad language and expletives are morally harmful to children, so that is something which falls within the remit of the licensing objectives. It is something which you should be seeking to control. And indeed, when she says, oh, well, it's fine because you hear it on the television, there's a watershed on the television. Children are specifically not able to hear foul language throughout the course of the day. There's a protection for children in the national legislation there. So this, we say, runs counter to national guidance, and it's not a fair representation of the position. Similarly, with the approach to NOS gas at 7.1, she explains what's not a criminal offence, possession and consumption, but she doesn't say that the dealing of NOS gas and the possession with the intent to supply of NOS gas is a criminal offence under the Psychoactive Substances Act 2016. And again, it's a partial view that you're being presented with by an officer who we say is apparently biased against us.
Mr Ranatunga, any comments?
Thank you, sir. It's right to note, firstly, paragraph 14.1 of the officer's report. That's at page 21. It refers properly to the national guidance at 14.2 on the separation of responsibilities. And as a result, you do have two separate officers before you. You have Dale Barrett, who appears as licensing officer and presents the licensing report. And you also have Mr Malcolm, who appears out for the licensing authority as responsible authority. Now, insofar as they take up separate roles, Mr Malcolm makes a representation and can make recommendations. Ms Barrett presents a licensing officer's report which does not make recommendations, and you'll see, having read the report, you'll form your own view, but it doesn't make any specific recommendations on what should happen in this case. So to that extent, my advice to you is that the national guidance has been followed in having a separation of responsibilities between those two officers. Insofar as there's a criticism, it is that Ms Barrett has sought to discuss conditions with Live Nation and provided comments. Now, I have seen the correspondence that's passed between Ms Barrett as licensing officer and Live Nation, and there is nothing in that, in my view, which shows she's doing anything other than, as a licensing officer, looking at conditions, looking at the wording, and looking at what would be appropriate as conditions. Those conditions, I understand, are put forward by Live Nation, without prejudice, of course. It's all a matter for you as to what you seek to impose and think are appropriate as conditions. And they have had discussions with Ms Barrett as to what would be acceptable. I see nothing wrong in a licensing officer taking that approach. She's not making recommendations with regards to those conditions and whether or not you should impose them. The way it's put is the appearance of bias. And I ask you to look at the report and the report that you've considered and ask yourself the question whether there's any appearance of bias in that. Now, it's gone wider. My advice to you is those points about Mr Colvin's previous involvement, it being a highly sensitive application, in my respectful view, go nowhere. I don't see how that's at all relevant to Ms Barrett's role as licensing officer. And then there's 2 points that are made on specifics. Well, it's something like a 20-page report, and the concern is that 2 parts of it, I think, in fairness, put as examples, demonstrate that she is in some way biased. Well, if one looks at both of those, just to take a little bit of time on that, use of expletives by artists, 7.2, refers to the national guidance, so it does refer you to what the national guidance says. There is nothing wrong, there is nothing biased, there is nothing apparently biased in a licensing officer giving a view, having directed you to the national guidance and what it says, and giving their own view. And equally, with regards to the thrust of the report, again, I can't see that there's anything insofar as a recommendation. And then the second point, sorry, was the nitrous oxide gas canisters. I believe that is not the only part of the report that refers to nitrous oxide gas canisters. You've heard what Mr Streeton says about it, and you can form your own views as to how much weight to put on that bit of the licence. But ultimately this question is there apparent bias by looking at those 2 parts which you've been directed to, or the report as a whole, or the fact of discussions between Ms Barrett and Live Nation as to what conditions and the wording of them and what conditions might be acceptable to the Council. My firm view is there's nothing that raises a concern in that regard. I would ask, perhaps, that you hear from Mr Colvin. He's for Live Nation. He might have some more light to shed on it. You might also ask to hear what Ms Barrett has to say about what is quite a serious allegation.
Ms Barrett.
Sorry. In my role as the licensing officer and also the chair of the SAG, I would take it as my duty to be engaging with any licence holder who wishes to discuss matters during an application process, Chair. It would be remiss of me not to do so, really.
Okay. Mr Colvin, any comments on what you've got?
Really, very briefly, Mr Streeton started by inferring that maybe there was something wrong with me being here for Live Nation. I acted for the London Borough of Haringey in the High Court and in the Court of Appeal, and also, I believe, made submissions in writing to the Supreme Court on a point of law, which was the power of the London Borough of Haringey to hold this event in that park. I was subsequently approached by Live Nation and asked whether I could appear for them in this review. I could not see a professional conflict. Given that I didn't think there was one, I had no choice but to act, because that's how the bar professional rules work. But I did, however, take the precaution of checking that through with the London Borough of Haringey to see whether they perceived a conflict. They didn't. That's why I'm here. It's perfectly proper for me to be here and perfectly improper to advert to it as part of a reason why Miss Barrett should not be allowed to be here herself. That's my first point. My second point is that insofar as the Friends of Finsbury Park want to make submissions about one or another paragraph in this report, then they could make submissions about it. They can say, well, please place less weight on that or more weight on the other. But as you pointed out, sir, what's the alternative is that you not only remove Miss Barrett from the hearing, but 27 pages of assistance to this subcommittee. And that's not practical. The Licensing Act and the Local Government Act and the courts recognise you have to be practical about these things. Officers sometimes have to fulfil different roles in relation to the same application. You have a lawyer sitting there to make sure that we're all on the straight and narrow in this hearing. Myself, Mr. Streeton, Miss Barrett as well. There's absolutely no reason to exclude her from this hearing.
So I just mentioned one other thing. The allegation is that, the final allegation, I believe, is that Ms Barrett's been obstructive in her dealings with the Friends of Finsbury Park. I think in fairness to her, she should be able to respond to that.
Sorry, sir. Chair, I can confirm that I actually did send an email to Ms Ring advising that during this period, once the consultation period had ended, that it was a good time to do mediation, and then put her in touch with the lawyer for Live Nation also. And I made a point of encouraging her to make use of the Section 182 guidance to familiarise herself with things, because just to say that mediation was a viable option and something that she could choose to look at.
I think we're gonna proceed with how we intended to proceed with the licensing officer's presentation. There will be many other elements of this hearing. That's only a short kind of element of it, although we are already past 7:30. But I actually think you might want to take up Mr. Colvin's suggestion of interrogating closely any parts in this report that you take issue with, and we'll deal with it that way. Ms. Barrett?
Thank you, Chair. Can I also do some preliminary matters, please? Can I point out firstly that there was a letter of representation received from Catherine West MP. That letter was sent directly to yourselves as the members chairing this meeting, just to inform that that letter was received out of time and it should not have been sent to the licensing panel. Legal advice has been given to the licensing subcommittee members to disregard the letter, and Catherine West MP has also been advised accordingly. Okay. Chair, the licence holder wishes to place before the licensing subcommittee the conditions that were agreed with Haringey and Islington. The Islington representation has now been formally withdrawn, but the papers do remain in the bundle, Chair, could be referred to. And just to reiterate, Chair, obviously they are put before you, but it's entirely down to the panel as to whether or not you agree to those conditions or not. Okay. Just some form of housekeeping. So we've got in the bundle, Chair, the Westminster City Council papers at page 225 to 245, and apologies because they appear again at page 295 to 315. Okay. I have, Chair, prepared a list that hopefully you'll find useful. So we'll have the corresponding numbers for the residents that have made representation and wish to speak. If when they go in to speak, if they can say their name and the page number for where their representation is, that would be helpful. And you also have, Chair, the list, the agenda bundle, which was in fact the document that Mr. Streeton referred to, was the one I'd sent to Mr. Taylor saying, you may find this useful, was actually one of these documents, in fact. Chair, also the Park Service representation, that can be found on page 803 of the bundle, and also on pages 807 and 808. They were printed the wrong way round, so page 6 comes before page 5, Chair, just to point that through. Before taking the panel through the report, however, this would be an appropriate time to draw attention to the matters that are contained in the various letters, Chair, but not within the remit of the licensing subcommittee to consider. So, Chair, matters such as views on whether or not the park should be used for events at all, access to the park on the run-up, during and after event days, not liking the type of music that Wireless offers, the social phenomenon that is NOS gas inhalation in the streets by individuals, and there is a full explanation of this that's covered in section 7 of the report, parking controls on event days, the income generated from the event and what it is used for, also not a matter for the LSE this evening, the cleansing of the park in general terms, the condition of the grassed area during or after events, imposing conditions for services to derive financial income from the promoters, or the policing resources for the event year to year. So i.e. you cannot state that you want X amount of police officers to be on duty. That's not within your gift. Okay. So, Chair, the licensing subcommittee have before them and are here to hear from all parties present in relation to the review application submitted by Friends of Finsbury Park against Live Nation. Whilst this is a large bundle, Chair, I'd like to draw the committee's attention to the various sections and encourage each relevant party to make their case first-hand to the licensing subcommittee. Can members confirm to me that they've actually read the report coming in this evening? Great. I won't take up too much time then to read it through word for word, but take the panel through the various documents contained in the report. The application form itself and the supporting documents from Friends of Finsbury Park can be found on page 27 onwards of the bundle, Chair. The application being on page 31 and their wireless report starting on page 42. The reasons given for the review state that Wireless 2017 had caused public nuisance and given rise to crime and disorder. The documents from the Friends of Finsbury Park consist of witness statements from local residents and the document that's labelled Wireless Report. And the applicant summarises that their concerns can be categorised as follows: the use of and the dealing of drugs, safety and antisocial behaviour, stewarding and policing issues, noise levels, litter damage and defecation, park closure and environmental concerns. There is also in the pack, Chair, the Big Sky acoustic report, which can be found on page 120. Alongside this are various newspaper articles relating to incidents of 2 deaths that occurred this year around the wireless event, and these can be found on page 255. Members, however, should be aware that the reports do not give a true reflection of the incidents and are not correctly reported. They should be treated with caution since the matters are subject to coroner's inquests, Chair. There is a document showing the noise complaints data at page 169 of the bundle, and the applicants will no doubt take you through this, Chair, to explain their relevance. The applicants have also submitted the report bundle, Chair, from the Westminster City Council relating to a review hearing that took place in 2011 against Live Nation in relation to their premises licence that was held at Hyde Park. These papers can be found on page 174, and the LSE will consider what weight is to be proportioned to the review bundle, and the overall minutes are also located at page 225, which you might find a bit more helpful because at least they summarise everything fully there. I shall leave it to the applicants for the review to set out their case first-hand to the licensing subcommittee. Chair, in terms of the licence that's been granted to Live Nation, this was done in December 2013, Chair. So I'm just trying to get you to the right location. The licence can be found on page 317, and it allows a maximum capacity of 49,999 and permits the following licensable activities: the provision of regulated entertainment, plays, films, live music, recorded music, performance of a dance, and anything of a similar description. You have there, Chair, the times that these are permitted. A copy of the licence, Chair, is on page 317, and the minutes are also attached at page 338. And you'll see from the minutes, Chair, that at that time we had objections from the Friends of Finsbury Park and neighbouring boroughs also, and along with residents who'd made representation and come to the hearing to verbalise their concerns, Chair. Chair, just to point out on page 322, the condition that was offered by the applicant in the initial application form on the operating schedule requested that the licence will be limited to a maximum of 5 event days in any calendar year. However, this is in effect overridden by the condition imposed at Annex 3 on page 333 by the licensing subcommittee that determined the application. It says the committee did not consider it appropriate in all circumstances to limit the number of events on an indefinite licence, Chair. So that is the condition that's actually should be in play on the licence. Chair, if I take you quickly through the representations. 6 or 7 residents made representations, Chair, and 2 residents' association. There is a wide range of matters covered in these letters of representation, Chair. You have noise levels and vibrations of buildings, policing of the event, urination in front gardens, use of expletives and the potential harm to children, congestion in the area due to amount of people, frequency and duration of the events, capacity of events being too large for the area, open drug use in the area, residents not being able to gain access back into their roads during the egress period, antisocial behaviour generated from the events before, during and after the events, and also noise from the helicopters, Chair. There is a list provided with all the page numbers for each representative, and as I've said before, it would be helpful if, as residents take their turn to speak, that they give their names and their corresponding page number for their rep. That can be found in the bundle. The report then goes on, Chair, to show the representation submitted by the London Borough of Hackney. They are here and represented this evening and can expand on their representations in support of the review. There are documentations from Councillor Potter, which is on page 649, and Councillor Selman on page 655. As I've said, Chair, the Islington representation has been withdrawn following agreements reached with the licence holder. Chair, happy to let you have seen the Islington documents, yes. So that consists of the letter of agreement between the licence holder and Islington Council and the conditions, Chair, that have been offered. You will find that the existing conditions have been altered slightly to name the 3 boroughs where relevant, and there are new conditions added at the end which require a series of additional meetings. And of course they are submitted for your consideration, Chair, this evening. Chair, next you will find the local authority RA's representations, and you will note that from the licensing authority RA, that can be found on page 742. There has been some work done on the conditions, Chair, that have come about through the process and planning of the events and learning from past events. These have been accepted by the licence holder and are placed before the licensing subcommittee by Live Nation for consideration without prejudice to the licensing subcommittee's final decision. The Haringey noise officer has submitted a representation, and that can be found on page 751. The noise officer has submitted a follow-up documentation in response to the proposed Hackney noise conditions, Chair, which can be found on page 777. I will leave it to the noise officer to take you through that, Chair, and explain the code of practice matters to you. The LSE also have representation on page 803 from the Parks Service, as the landowners. It is important to note that even though the licence holders hold a premises licence on Finsbury Park, that licence cannot be used without firstly having consent from the landlords. At sections 11 to 11.8 of the report, you have set out the parks management process, which covers the council's expectation from prospective hirers of Haringey Parks, the events management itself, and the valuable stakeholders meetings that take place before, during and after the events. The licensing subcommittee will also find in the bundle documents from the licence holder, Live Nation Music UK Limited. These consist of the initial response to the review at page 811, the Vanguardia acoustic response to the Big Sky report at 832, and further documents from Live Nation relating to the response to the overall review, Chair. There is quite a list there, and I've provided that in the paginated bundle of documents I've given to you. Chair, at 5, there is the context of the issues that are raised, Chair. So within the report, I have set out, Chair, the issues around the vibration and swaying of buildings. The noise officer will no doubt be able to assist you with that, Chair, but there is some, at least, background information on page 12 at 5.1 there for you. The policing of events, Chair, is at section 6. Basically, Chair, that's just reiterating that the police do not provide stewarding or do crowd safety control measures for large events. It's entirely down to the licence holder. An explanation about nitrous oxide gas, Chair, and that's in the context of, what you see on at events or nights out in London, just explaining how the land lies with that. And yes, Mr. Streeton is correct that the selling of it is the actual crime. The use of expletives, Chair, can be found at 7.2. The arguments regarding the reduction in event capacity considerations, Chair, linked to traffic. This, Chair, was picked up through to matters mentioned by Hackney. Included in the report there at 7.7 are issues that TfL would consider if they needed to bring a request forward for the capacities to be reduced. Those would be the reasons at 7.7 that they would request that, and that would then be supported by the authority and the police and so forth, and work with the organiser to find a solution, Chair. Chair, at point 9, you have the background to the wireless festivals. So the first wireless festival was managed by Live Nation in 2014 and again in 2015. It was during this particular event that the now familiar imagery was taken of the gate being released and crowds of people who had not obtained tickets acting en masse to breach the event fence line, trying to gain entry to the event by any means necessary. Festival Republic then took over the management of the wireless festival from 2016 to date under the Live Nation licence. In response to the 2015 crowd action and behaviour, and to take stock of how the parks policy was being operated, the Council's own Overview and Scrutiny Committee put in place the Finsbury Park Event Scrutiny Project to reflect and learn lessons and to understand the impact of these events. The scrutiny panel heard evidence from officers, residents, representatives, neighbouring boroughs, Metropolitan Police, noise specialists, the various promoters, Friends of Finsbury Park, Transport for London, etc. Chair, I've included in the pack at page 1029 the recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee that addressed the issues in relation to noise, complaint management, communication, stakeholder engagement, and looked at how adverse effects can be further mitigated, Chair. And Chair, out of that Overview and Scrutiny panel, project, came the stakeholders' meetings that were then chaired by the lead member going forward, Chair. Chair, at point 10 is an overview of specific considerations for Wireless 2017. And at point 12, Chair, the report provides information on the event management plan in the context of this document. It does become part of the conditions of the licence, in effect, and is reviewed and updated year to year, taking into consideration any learning points after each event. The event management plan covers a range of issues that the licence holder holds responsibility for. And at 12.4, Chair, just to also note that counter-terrorism should also be included in that list, Chair. Chair, at 12.5, we've listed there the conditions covered within the licence. And we go on, therefore, Chair, to talk about the Safety Advisory Group. This is also a condition of the licence, and representatives from the following organisations sit on the Safety Advisory Group. So you'll have the Licensing Authority, the Police, the Fire Authority, London Ambulance, Highways, representatives from Haringey, Hackney and Islington, Transport for London, all the various services from them, the various regulatory services within the council, and of course the Transport Police, Chair, as well as the promoter. In addition to the main SAG, Chair, there are subgroups that are set up to discuss specific matters in more detail, such as security, medical provisions, noise management or traffic management. The aim of the group is to fully discuss suitable arrangements that organisers have made to minimise the risk of public safety relating to and planning and management of a specific event. Officers aim to ensure compliance with the appropriate legislation, and the group refers to the Event Safety Guide, Chair, which provides basic standards and safety measures to encourage a consistent approach with some flexibility, taking into account the nature and size of the event. At the end of each event period, Chair, there is a feedback and a debrief meeting of the SAG. And this forms an integral part of the planning and learning that is then put in place for future events. The process, therefore, follows a pattern of plan, do, review, a continuous improvement model. The minutes from the 2017 debrief, Chair, are attached in the bundle at page 1041, and the debrief minutes for the 2018 events are attached at page 1061, and apologies, it's still labelled 2017, but it is in fact the 2018 debrief. Chair, as this is just to reiterate this part really, because it's been now discussed, but the licensing administration. So the licensing authority has two distinct roles in this process. A licensing officer has an administrative role to perform by assisting the licensing subcommittee through this report on the process by which it should be considered. Separately, the licensing authority is a responsible authority under the 2003 Act and can make representations in relation to an application. Having regard to paragraphs 9.7 and 9.18 of the National Guidance, it is important to achieve that separation of responsibilities to ensure procedural fairness and eliminate conflicts of interest. Applying that guidance, there are separate officers for the administration role and the role of representing the licensing authority as the responsible authority. It is considered inappropriate, Chair, for the officers involved in the administration of applications under the Licensing Act 2003 to make recommendations. However, officers representing the responsible authorities may make recommendations with regard to the licensing objectives, including requesting that conditions be imposed on a licence. Chair, further down in the report you have got the legislation and, of course, the following provisions of the Licensing Act come into play there at sections 51 and 52. You also have the hearing regulations, Chair, mentioned, and I'm sure the legal officers will be able to talk that through with you in deliberations. In terms of policy considerations, Chair, at points 15.2 through to 15.7, Chair, I have taken there and listed for you parts of the Council's own Statement of Licensing Policy. So you see from the Statement of Licensing Policy, paragraph 9 talks about putting in place plans that will assist to minimise disruption to the day-to-day lives of local residents, businesses and existing operators for the period of the event, providing a robust traffic and transport plan that takes into account the needs of the local community, and so on, Chair. I'm sure you've read through them. Chair, you've also got Section 182 guidance shown as Section 16 and 16.3 also, Chair. In terms of the licensing officer's observations, Chair, it is the licensing authority's aim to facilitate well-run and managed premises, with licence holders displaying sensitivity to the impact of the premises on local residents. In considering licence applications where relevant, representations are made with the potential for public nuisance or public disorder, having regard to all the circumstances of the case. This authority will consider each application and work with the parties concerned to ensure that adequate noise control measures are in place. Any action taken to promote the licensing objectives will be appropriate and proportionate, Chair. The licensing authority may not impose conditions unless its discretion has been exercised following receipt of relevant representation and it is satisfied as a result of hearing that it is appropriate to impose conditions to promote one or more of the 4 licensing objectives. In cases, members should make evaluative judgments where necessary to make findings of fact. The civil burden of proof applies, that is the balance of probability. The government has advised that conditions must be tailored to the individual type, location, characteristics of the premises and events concerned. Conditions cannot seek to manage the behaviour of customers once they are beyond the direct management of the licence holder and their staff. 17.5, Chair, in summary, having conducted the hearing of this application, the committee must decide which of the licensing objectives have been engaged, if any. They must seek to establish the cause or causes of any concerns which the representations identify, resolve any issues of fact as necessary, decide whether the licensing objectives have been undermined and whether or not it is appropriate to exercise any powers under the review to promote those licensing objectives. Take a proportionate approach to the exercising of any powers, addressing why lesser steps are not appropriate. At section 18, Chair, in terms of the options open to the licensing subcommittee, once you've heard from all parties, Chair, the panel will go away to deliberate. And the options that open to the panel are to modify the conditions of the licence, to exclude a licensed activity from the scope of the licence, to remove the designated premises supervisor, or to suspend the licence for a period not exceeding 3 months, or to revoke the licence, or to take no action, Chair. The subcommittee must ensure that all licensing decisions have a direct relationship to the promotion of one or more of the 4 licensing objectives. Must have regard to the Council's Statement of Licensing Policy and regard to the Secretary of State's national guidance. Where the authority modifies the conditions or exclude a licensed activity from the scope of the licence, it may determine that that modification or exclusion is to have effect permanently or for a period not exceeding 3 months. At 18.3, Chair, the licensing authority's determination of this application does not have effect until the 21 days appeal period has expired, or if the decision is appealed, the date the appeal is determined and or disposed of. Chair, just to remind you at 18.4 that the committee is minded of their duty under the Crime and Disorder Act 1998 to consider the crime and disorder implications of their decision and the authority's responsibility to cooperate in the reduction of crime and disorder in the borough. And at 18.5, the subcommittee is reminded that the Human Rights Act 1998 guarantees the right to a fair hearing for all parties in the determination of their civil rights. The Act also provides for the protection of private and family life, and Article 1 of the first protocol provides for the protection of property, which may also include premises licences, Chair. And Chair, there I will stop if you have any questions for me.
Members, any objections to going straight on to the presentation by the applicant? Thank you very much. So then on we go to the presentation from the applicant for the review. You'll be leading on it, will you? Thank you. You saved me there. Did you want to clarify anything on the report first before we go ahead?
No, sir. That's fine. Sorry, no.
It buzzes when it's off.
Sorry.
Right. Okay. Well, the other one's going to have to be off now. Okay. Now that on. So does that feel better?
Yes. That's good.
All
Sorry.
right.
Thank you.
Can I ask how long you think you'll
so I was going to deal
need for introductory
with order of play. I think that I will need somewhere in the region of 20 minutes to half an hour to open our case, and then I will have 6 witnesses to call this evening. I do have one witness who can't be here this evening but can come tomorrow. I don't particularly mind how you want to deal with that. They will have put in a written statement, so you will have that. They'll be here to answer questions, and I can ask them to speak tomorrow if that would assist you.
Let's play that by ear, and then when we come tomorrow, we'll see if there's anything that wasn't entirely covered.
Yes,
and,
sir. I'm grateful for that. I do have, and it's entirely a matter for you whether you want it, a note from which I intend to speak. I'm happy to hand that to anyone who wants to. I've got copies. It will save your hand, it will probably save time, and Mr Colvin will have it overnight to respond to. If you would prefer not to have it in writing, then I will simply speak to it, and the copies need not be handed out.
Well, it's a matter of if there are objections to that.
Can I ask whether it contains anything new? So you can amplify the application and representations. Is there anything new in your written document?
The short answer is I don't think so. It's all amplification. If there is something which is new, I'm happy for it. It will be something that I would say orally anyway, and objection can be taken to it straight away. There's no evidence that's not before the committee.
So strictly the position is new documents can only be tabled at this hearing if all the parties agree, and that means all the responsible authorities and Mr Colvin and everyone else. But it would seem from what Mr Streeton says that this might be a summary. If it's no more than that, perhaps it's not an issue. But you might, I think, want to hear from the relevant parties to hear what they want to say about that.
Yes.
No one's seen it, is the point.
No, sure. Mr Colvin is deep in deliberation, so I will go to him now.
The first mention I've had of this, we've been sitting here since 5 o'clock. We put in our submissions 3 months ago, and at 8:10, we're told there's a document. I've never seen the document, and I don't know what it says. And to be perfectly frank, I'd rather we stuck to the normal procedure, which is the advocate makes an oral submission. If Mr Streeton, he knows I'm in this case because he was complaining about it to you last week. If he'd sent it to me and I could have seen it, I might have had a different view. So I am sorry, I don't consent to it going in.
Point well made, thank you very much. Okay, so what we're talking about here is 20 to 30 minutes you verbally, and then you have 6 to call. Okay. All right. Let's see where we get to after you've done your opening remarks. Thank you.
I'm grateful. This is an application by the Friends of Finsbury Park, and just by way of some background, the Friends are a charity formed in 1986. The members of the Friends have lived in and around the park for decades, and its membership is community-minded and public-spirited. Members come from all walks of life, and they are brought together by a single unifying charitable interest, namely the park and the enjoyment amenity it provides to local residents. As members of this subcommittee will no doubt be aware, the Friends are of the opinion that holding regular large-scale events in the park is inimical to its fundamental purpose as an open space, and that purpose they see as somewhere to escape to in an otherwise urban environment. That's a matter that the Friends have previously litigated with this authority, and I've dealt with Mr Colvin's involvement in that. But we say that for present purposes that should all be set aside. What it's important to focus on is the application that the Friends have made this evening, and that is an application pursuant to Section 51 of the Licensing Act to review the licence, and it should therefore be seen through the lens of Section 4 of that Act and, in layman's terms, determined in accordance with the 4 licensing objectives of the prevention of crime and disorder, the prevention of public nuisance, promoting public safety, and promoting the protection of children from harm. So through that lens, sir, we ask you to determine that, and with that in mind, I propose to structure these submissions as follows. Firstly, I'll deal with the background to this application. Secondly, with the impact of wireless on local residents. Thirdly, I will rebut the written case put by Live Nation. And fourthly, I will deal with how we say the problem that arises from wireless should be tackled. So turning first to the background, unlike many of the members of the Friends of Finsbury Park, the Wireless Festival is a relative newcomer to Finsbury Park. It arrived in Haringey in 2014, and before that it had taken place in Hyde Park, at Harewood House near Leeds, and at the Olympic Park. We say Friends of Finsbury Park is more constrained than any of those locations because it is surrounded by residential streets. Live Nation was granted in 2013 an indefinite licence, which gives it a maximum capacity of 49,999 people, and it has opening hours from 10 in the morning to 11 in the evening for live music, and then 10 to 10:30 Monday to Saturday, and 10 to 10 on Sunday. And then in terms of alcohol, that's 30 minutes before any of those hours. When Wireless first came to the park, it was managed by Live Nation, and it's Live Nation who still appear before you as the premises licence holder. However, following the 2015 festival, when, as Ms Barrett's report says, crowds breached the fence and flooded into the event, Festival Republic took over the management of the event. Nevertheless, sir, it is the premises licence holder, Live Nation, with whom the buck stops. Since the time when the festival arrived in Finsbury Park, Wireless has been somewhat beleaguered by problems. Although it is a relative newcomer by comparison with some of my clients who have lived in the area for decades, Wireless is no longer in a position to say that these problems are just teasing problems. They are problems which repeat year on year and are the corollary of holding a festival of the nature and scale of Wireless in such close proximity to a densely inhabited residential area. It can't either be said that Live Nation's record is impeccable. The problems in 2015 were exceptional, but there are, we say, serious problems every single year. Those problems predate and perhaps to some degree account for the move to Finsbury Park. So, for example, following a review of Live Nation's premises licence in 2012, in the course of which, incidentally, Live Nation accepted, as one of the parties, all of the parties there accepted, that the festival there had resulted in public nuisance, including, and I note this, from the base frequency noise. So at that time in 2012, Westminster responded, firstly by reducing the number of events that could be held in any given year, secondly by reducing the event capacity, and thirdly by including conditions on the licence that dealt firstly with the noise music level and brought that down to 65 decibels or 15 decibels above the average for a 5-minute period, and secondly by limiting the mixer position to ensure that the 63 Hz and 125 Hz levels, which are the octave frequencies dealing with bass, and we'll come to that later, should not exceed 75 decibels over a 15-minute averaging period. We say it's no coincidence that the very next year after those conditions were imposed, Wireless moved to Finsbury Park, and 5 years on, the same problems remain here, just transmuted to Finsbury, as were in Westminster and Hyde Park before. We say that Finsbury Park is a more sensitive location than Hyde Park, and that it is more closely enmeshed with its dense residential population, which results in all the more problems which we now deal with under the second of the 4 headings, namely the impact of the festival on residents. So it is difficult to reconcile Live Nation's portrayal of Wireless with the experience of local residents, and that's despite the fact that it is the residents who live through it every year. If you accept Live Nation's case, then it would appear that Wireless has very little impact on anyone. By its second set of written submissions, Live Nation says that the evidence clearly suggests that it's a well-run event and proper steps are taken to promote the licensing objectives. I'm afraid that's a statement with which my client takes particular issue. It's unrealistic. More than 70 local residents have supported the Friends application to review the licence, and this, Live Nation say, goes with the territory. But we say it does not. Live Nation argues, and the subcommittee always hears from objectors rather than supporters, but that's not right either. All of us in this room will have dealt with licensing applications where there's been a review of a particularly popular premises, and lots of people have come along to support it in the face of that review. That's not the case here at all. I mean, an example of that, because I see you shaking your head, would be Fabric, for which both Mr. Colvin and I acted on different occasions. Well, I sir, can certainly think of other occasions where it's happened, and say fabric would be one that Mr Colvin and I are both familiar with. A very great number of people turned up to support premises following a review, precisely because there was a great public support for it. There have been serious problems there, no one was denying that. I had acted for it in a previous review only a year or so before Mr Colvin acted for it. That was a well, I simply wanted to give an example to the chair when he said he
Yeah, all right, okay, fair enough. It was my own fault for intimating that, that I required an example, but let's get back on track.
Yes, sir. So what we say is that this is a case where there was only one representation in support of the festival, and that has now fallen away. It's been retracted. So there is no representation from any resident in support of the festival, but there are 70 against. And those 70, we say, can't on any view be seen as what Wireless describe as a very low number of representations. Again, this committee will be familiar with how many representations it receives. And we say that that is a substantial number. It represents a real feeling amongst the community. And if you look at what the complaints say, they all say the same thing. They all follow the same sort of lines and are complaining about the same issues. The noise representation from this borough's environmental health officer suggests that he was aware of 37 noise complaints in 2017 and 50 such complaints this year. So firstly, the number has gone up. But secondly, that may well not be the full extent of it, bearing in mind that the festival falls across 3 boroughs, and therefore there are potentially complaints to the authorities in other areas. And I'll let Mr Vivian deal with this, but essentially we say that that is a high number of complaints for noise in relation to a festival of this nature in an urban area. It is, we say, outside of the ordinary. The consistent picture that we say emerges from the complaints and representations made to this subcommittee is that there is a problem with Wireless, and that the problem is that it fails to promote a number of the licensing objectives, dealing firstly with the question of public nuisance. As the Home Office's statutory guidance makes clear at 2.16, in the context of the 2003 Act, public nuisance has a broad common law discretion, and that meaning includes the reduction of the living and working amenity and environment of other persons living and working in the area of the licensed premises. So when you ask yourself whether or not this particular premises promotes the licensing objective of preventing public nuisance, that's what you should have in mind. What is the effect on the living and working amenity environment of other persons living and working in the area? Is that harmed? We say clearly it is. Haringey's own statement of licensing policy identifies at least 2 ways in which such nuisance may arise. The first is noise, but the other is the behaviour of patrons outside premises, particularly on the highway and the streets, which can be intimidating or dangerous and can hamper people using the public highway freely. We say, in light of that definition of nuisance, plainly Wireless causes a public nuisance, and we say it falls under both heads. So firstly, noise. The committee will have read my client's application and supporting evidence, as well as representations from residents, and it has before it the witness statements made by, and we'll hear from, a number of local residents who experience noise nuisance as a result of Wireless. From the evidence and representations made by other residents, we say there emerges a clear and coherent picture of the impact the noise caused by Wireless has on residents. People explain that the noise from the festival is so loud that it is impossible to enjoy the amenity of their homes. That is so even with the windows closed, and bearing in mind that Wireless takes place in the peak of summer, just keeping your window closed causes all sorts of its own problems because it's hot, and it's therefore very unpleasant to have the windows closed and not be able to enjoy some cool air in your home. Because if you do, the sound levels go up even further than they would with the windows closed. So, as you will hear and as you will have read, representations have been made in particular by residents with young children who complain that the noise prevents their children from sleeping, and a picture emerges of a noise position which is not acceptable. Indeed, sir, again, as you will hear, more than one resident states that they either do or wish they could move away from the area during the course of wireless, if not for good. A particular cause for concern is the base level noise and vibration. Residents refer in their witness statements to buildings rattling and shaking, and it appears to be accepted that that takes place. There has been some suggestion that the vibration of the buildings is caused by crowds jumping. Again, I will leave some of that to Mr. Vivian, but as I understand it, the vibration is in the 1 to 2 hertz frequency, or some of the vibration is in the 1 to 2 hertz frequency, and that is probably the result of crowds jumping. But there is other vibration at higher frequency bands, in particular 31.5 hertz, 63 hertz, and 125 hertz octaves, which cause significant disturbance in and of themselves to residents. So that's the music, and particularly the low pressure music, not the jumping. Essentially, sir, the initial airborne sound from the PA has so much energy that the pressure fluctuations in the air excite the solid objects, and that includes walls, windows, buckets of water, cups of tea, and the vibrations run through people's homes. So just to be clear, ground-borne vibration, 1 to 2 hertz, does not originate from the PA system. That's people jumping. But 20 hertz and above, that is something which you can effectively control through a noise condition. So in the course of considering how to tackle the impact of wireless, local residents, and in particular the Friends, instructed an independent acoustic expert, that's Mr. Richard Vivian of Big Sky Acoustics, to carry out an assessment of the impact of the wireless festival. His conclusions support the Friends' first-hand experience. What his noise monitoring shows is that at some of the nearby residential premises, the sound pressure in that 31.5 hertz octave band, which is sometimes referred to as sub-bass, is at 90 decibels, and it can come close to that 90 decibel level in the 63 hertz and 125 hertz octave bands. We say that that's unacceptable, and it's a key cause of our complaint, because the conditions on the current licence are incapable of dealing with that problem. As Mr. Vivian explains at paragraph 10.2 of his report, the A-weighted curve, which is used in the measurements in the licence as it presently stands, increasingly excludes the frequencies below 1 kilohertz, and as a result attenuates the level in each octave band so that the bass sounds have minimal impact on the ultimate resultant single finger measurement. So essentially, by using the A-weighted calculation, you increasingly fail to take account of the bass frequency sounds. And we say it's for that reason that many licences for outdoor music festivals specifically include a condition that deals with bass frequencies. Live Nation's licence has no such condition. Vanguardia, the noise consultant employed by and therefore with a financial interest in the continuation of wireless, says in their report that the current noise conditions are at least equivalent to, or in many cases more comprehensive than, other premises licence conditions. We say that's simply not a credible contention. Firstly, Westminster imposed a condition controlling bass frequency at Wireless itself when it was located in Hyde Park. So Wireless knows that these conditions are imposed because it's had one before. Secondly, they're commonplace throughout London. Vanguardia itself acts for one of the festivals, SW4, which has just such a condition, and I understand has been used in the consideration of the condition put forward by the licensee and to some degree negotiated with others. So again, Vanguardia is well aware that those base conditions are on other premises licences for festivals because it acts for Lambeth and it's seen it on SW4. So it's disingenuous, to say the least, we say, for it to say that the noise conditions are at least equivalent to or more comprehensive than other licence conditions, and you should take that into account when you consider the credibility of their evidence. We say it's quite troubling that Live Nation has not engaged with this issue of bass sound, despite complaints surrounding it for years and years and years. Even in the face of this application for a review, Live Nation's position, at least until very, very recently indeed, and I've been playing catch-up with the correspondence that appears to have taken place, was that none of the representations, and I quote, justify interfering with the licence. That's paragraph 4 of their second set of submissions. And that's plainly not the case. Whatever else, everyone seems to agree that some change is necessary, and what we're really arguing about is what the extent of the change should be in relation to controlling bass noise. And I'll ask you to listen very carefully to Mr. Vivian, who is independent, we say. He's got nothing to gain from representing my client other than his ordinary fee, and he's an expert. So listen very carefully when he explains what he explains and why he thinks a particular level should be set in the condition. Turning away from noise and moving to antisocial behaviour, it's quite clear from the evidence that my clients present and from the many other representations that you've received that wireless results in antisocial behaviour in the vicinity of Finsbury Park. And that includes, firstly, public urination and defecation. And we say that residents refer to individuals urinating and defecating not just on the street, but in people's front gardens and on their front doorsteps. And if you can imagine what it's like to open your door to a pile of human excrement, we say that's both unacceptable and inexcusable. It's not something that's par for the course with a big festival. It's all about where the festival is located and how it's managed. And it's something which, if it really can't be prevented, strongly militates against allowing just that sort of event to take place. If that's what people are going to have to put up with, it's not a price worth paying. Secondly, drug dealing and drug use. We say it's undeniable that as a result of the Wireless Festival, levels of public drug use in and around Finsbury Park increase. The representations refer to witnessing open drug dealing from cars on residential roads and indeed to needles found on the streets. For the avoidance of doubt, the supply or possession with intent to supply of NOS is a criminal offence, and I've referred to the Psychoactive Substances Act. And therefore, when you get large quantities of NOS held by an individual, or you see individuals passing NOS between one another, that is very much a matter for you, sir, because it is a crime, and it is something which you, under the licensing objectives, should be seeking to prevent. It's not a social epidemic to which you should be turning a blind eye. Thirdly, in terms of disorder, sir, drunk and disorderly behaviour by festival goers. And you'll have seen residents complain about the fact that crowds from the festival are not properly managed. They have been observed to jump barriers, and you'll have seen that in the representations from other local authorities to you, and to find their way onto residential streets. And there is consistent evidence of outbreaks of violent behaviour witnessed by residents. This is intimidating, and it can't be said to promote the licensing objective of preventing public nuisance. Live Nation may point to the fact that additional staff were deployed in response to Hackney's previous complaints, but the increased presence was only in relation to the Hackney area, and all that did was displace the problem into other local authorities such as Islington and Haringey. And if Live Nation were really serious about tackling the problems that result from their festival, they wouldn't just respond as a knee-jerk reaction when one local authority complains. They'd take a comprehensive view. They'd say, OK, there's a problem there, but if we just increase there, there's going to be a problem elsewhere. And they'd increase everywhere. But that's not what they do. They just try to put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Fourthly, just litter. And I know it sounds like a small thing, but when you look at everything together, when you're the person that lives there, it's not a small thing at all. The effect of the festival, undeniably, is that it creates a large quantity of litter, and that litter finds its way onto the street. And we completely accept there's a concerted effort after the concert to clean the litter up, but more effort should be made to stop it at source. It's not a problem that people should have to deal with. And it is a side effect, undeniably, of having a festival in this sort of urban location, that people then open their doors and live in streets which are not in the sort of state that they would ordinarily be. If you have the festival somewhere outside of town or in a more open area, you don't get that right on people's doorstep. It's a product of putting this sort of event on this sort of scale right next to densely packed residential dwellings. So, sir, in light of all of that, we say that the licensing objective of public nuisance is plainly engaged, and ultimately it will be for you to decide what the appropriate measure to take in response to that is. Turning to crime and disorder, the licensing authority's response makes quite clear that in 2017 there were 23 reported crimes linked to the Wireless Festival. The number of crimes in 2018 isn't given, but there were apparently approximately 40 arrests, and we say it's a safe assumption that there were more crimes reported than there were arrests. Even if the number reported was only 40, that would be a 20% figure for all of the reported crime in any given year, taking place in just one weekend of the 364-day period. We point, therefore, to the quantum of the criminal activity and also to the nature of the criminal activity which takes place, because the reported crimes are not all low-level misdemeanours. It's not just phone theft. It's actual bodily harm to staff when they're trying to stop people from jumping barriers. There are numerous instances of possession with intent to supply or possession or supply of illegal drugs, including Class A drugs, and there are multiple sexual assaults on females. Those are not the sorts of offence that this authority should be taking lightly. Those are serious offences which the licensing objectives require this authority to seek to prevent. Turning from crime and disorder to public safety, so at Wireless in 2018, and this has been mentioned, 2 young people died at or near the Wireless Festival having attended it. And we, as the Friends, extend our sympathies to the families. It's genuinely tragic. Now, the fact that those 2 people who had attended the festival died near it in the space of one weekend does not suggest that the public safety licensing objective is being respected, we say, as it should. Whilst the circumstances of the deaths are unclear, there is evidence before you that during the festival an ambulance was prevented from passing down a street that it was intending to use and was required to turn around. And we say that's not acceptable. That's not something which should happen if a festival is properly planned and run. And we say in those circumstances that you should have serious concerns about the way in which this festival treats the public safety licensing objective. Finally, under the licensing objective, sir, the protection of children from harm. In addition to the problems we've already outlined, many of which cross over into an impact on children and a potential harm to children, we want to deal specifically with the use of expletives by artists at the Wireless Festival, because, as I've already said, the Home Office guidance states explicitly at paragraph 2.2 that the protection of children from harm includes the protection of children from moral, psychological and physical harm, which includes wider harms such as exposure to strong language and sexual expletives. That's in the National Home Office guidance. And so it's very surprising to hear your officer in her report say that Haringey is unable to control the language being used by artists and to seek to explain it away as something heard in everyday life on the television and a form of artistic expression, because on broadcast media there's a watershed. You can't use that sort of language between 9 p.m. Or until 9 p.m. at night until the next morning. That there's a period during which you can use it and a period during which you can't. And there are plenty of artists who are able to express themselves during the day, and it's a choice if you want to be one of the artists who uses words which are not before the which are not before the watershed. That's a choice in and of itself. This festival has made a choice to promote artists who do use expletives, and that's fine. That's a matter of artistic expression, but it's not appropriate to do it in what is a family area where there's a children's playground also in the park, which continues to be used, where there are families living all round. Those families shouldn't have swear words and sexual expletives beamed into their house at high volume simply because the festival isn't minded to do more than ask people very nicely if they wouldn't mind awfully not possibly using the occasional swear word. It could be tougher. There could be a penal clause in the condition that the licence holder in their contract that they have with the artist saying, do not use a swear word or we will not pay you your fee. But that's not what they do. So it could be tougher. It's not. It's tolerated tacitly. On that basis, though, we do say that this premises does not promote the licensing objectives. That's not the way in which this licence is run. I turn then, sir, to the third of my subheads, which is my response to the Live Nation argument. And essentially, Live Nation advances 5 points, and you'll find them at their second set of submissions, paragraphs 49 to 58, and I take each of them in turn. The first submission is a rather bold one. It's that nobody has suggested that the licensee is not fit and proper to run wireless. Well, we say that that sits rather uncomfortably with the fact that the last time wireless was run by the licensee, Live Nation, the barriers were charged and broken down, and as a result of that incident, Live Nation no longer operates the festival itself. It has to have someone else do it for it, namely Festival Republic. So the suggestion that Live Nation is not seen by anyone as not fit and proper rather lacks confidence if it has to use someone else to do it. In addition to that, sir, and for the avoidance of doubt, our case is that Live Nation is not fit and proper, and that's for 3 main reasons. Firstly, the ongoing failure to uphold the licensing objectives to which I have already referred, and examples of that would be base frequencies and the failure to deploy resources proactively to tackle problems rather than reactively when someone like Hackney complains. Secondly, the nature of the staff employed by Live Nation to manage the festival. You'll see Hackney's representation refers to the fact that in 2017 it requested funding for 66 SIA qualified stewards, and what it was provided with was funding for 14 stewards, 6 of whom were SIA qualified. That resulted, Hackney says, in a large number of individuals exiting directly onto Seven Sisters Road when they weren't expected to, and therefore an inadequacy of provision. And so in addition to that, you'll have seen residents complain in their responses to the fact that stewards have been witnessed drinking and smoking drugs during the festival. There's a clear issue, we say, with quality control in terms of the stewards employed. It's not clear what training they're given. It's not clear how they're remunerated. It's not clear what the extent of their obligations are. And essentially, it would appear that Live Nation runs the event on a budget rather than in the public interest with properly trained security staff. Thirdly, we point to the running of the festival itself, and you'll see this in Islington's representations. They refer to the much publicised issues this year regarding alcohol and tap water provision at the Wireless Festival. There were long queues for bars and an inability to access drinking water, and also as a result of those long queues, people were encouraged to binge drink, because if you make someone queue a very long time to get a drink, what they do when they get to the front of the queue is buy as many as possible, and then they don't want to carry them around, so they drink them all at once. So it encourages binge drinking, and from a festival operator which purports to have the experience it does, it's a rookie error not to have enough bars and not to have them properly manned. It's a really basic error, and we say it's extremely troubling that that's the way in which this festival works. So on those 3 bases, failure to uphold the licensing objectives, nature of the staff employed, and the running of the festival itself, we do take issue with the fitness of Live Nation to operate a festival on this scale. Turning to the second point taken by Mr Colvin at those paragraphs, it's again a bold proposition, which is that nobody asserts that there is a breach of licence condition. Well, that's not the case, and frankly it's something that you could only really say if you hadn't read my client's case properly, or if you weren't aware of what the conditions on the licence say. Because just by way of example, condition 18 requires satisfactory stewarding and SIA-accredited staff, and part of my client's case is, and has always been, that there was not satisfactory stewarding. So that's plainly a matter which bites on whether or not there was compliance with the conditions. Similarly, condition 87 requires adequate barriers and fences, and that's something which we say it would be very difficult for wireless to suggest it has always had in circumstances where they were rushed and where there's a heap of evidence about people jumping and moving over barriers. So if we say no, that's not right, it is an issue whether or not there's compliance with conditions. But secondly, and more fundamentally on the question of conditions, my client's case is that the conditions on the licence aren't fit for purpose. We say, firstly, that many of the conditions simply require documentation to be approved, and our past experience shows us that this has failed to result in the promotion of the licensing objectives. Secondly, that some of the conditions on the licence are vague and imprecise, and that makes it difficult to enforce them. And to give you examples of those conditions, they're conditions 18, 51 and 73 would all fall within that. And thirdly, we say some of the conditions are simply insufficiently robust. And an example of that would be the noise conditions at 104 to 109, which fail properly to promote the licensing objective of promoting public nuisance and don't deal with bass sound. So we say that Live Nation's submission that they comply with all their conditions misses the point, because the real point is that the conditions on their licence are not adequate, and that Live Nation has taken full advantage of that inadequacy. It hasn't run wireless in an appropriate manner, and it's failed to uphold the licensing objectives as a result. Thirdly, I deal with the question of responsible authorities, because what Mr. Colvin says is, well, none of the responsible authorities say anything against us. But firstly, sir, I direct you to paragraph 9.12 of the Home Office's Section 182 guidance, which says that it's incumbent on responsible authorities to ensure that their representations can withstand scrutiny. And we say that in this case, firstly, we have procedural concerns, as I outlined at the start, and secondly, ultimately, it's for you to take a view of the evidence, but the evidence of the members of the public, the 70 representations that you have before you, the witnesses that you will hear from when I call them, is consistent. They all say the same thing, and they're not lying. They're here telling you the truth. So you should base your decision on that evidence rather than worrying about what responsible authorities may or may not be saying in a case like this. Fourthly, levels of support and complaint, and I've largely already dealt with that. Essentially, we say that 70 is a large number of people to be complaining, and it doesn't go with the territory that there's no one in support. That's, I'm afraid, just an unfortunate position that this licensee finds itself in, and it's indicative of the operation it runs. Fifthly, and finally, the mechanisms that are in place. And this is what Live Nation says is the most important tenet of its case. It says that it has a number of mechanisms, specifically the SAG and the event management plan, which enable it to run the event properly, regardless, essentially, of the other conditions on its licence. But we take issue with that for three reasons. That's not an answer to our case. Firstly, and most obviously, because those mechanisms are there now and they're not working. Wales has been in the park since 2014, and residents continue to suffer the same problems or permutations of the same problems as they have year after year after year. Secondly, we say the purpose of the licence condition is to provide a red line delineating the limits within which the event may acceptably take place. Other mechanisms are there to add colour and detail within the line. And at present, the red line is 1, insufficiently clearly defined, and 2, wrongly positioned. It allows flexibility in relation to matters where there should be a hard line preventing something. Thirdly, sir, we say that the members of this subcommittee are the democratically elected representatives of the people of Haringey. The members of the Safety Advisory Group and other advisory bodies mostly are not. And this leaves a democratic deficit. We say it's important that the bounds, the red lines, are set by the people who were elected by the public and who are there to represent residents' interests, not behind closed doors by people who don't necessarily listen to what everybody has to say. So, sir, notwithstanding the 5 points that Live Nation takes against my client, we say that you should listen to our evidence and you should take a view as to whether or not this festival really does promote the licensing objectives. And if you're of the view that it doesn't, then you should take action against it. And that leaves us with the final question of what action you should take. My client's primary position is that you should revoke the licence. Live Nation has failed to run wireless in a way that promotes the licensing objectives. It's been there for long enough to deal with any tealing problems. And essentially the issue is that it's the wrong event for its location. It's too big, it's too loud, and it's too unruly. So our primary position is that you should revoke the licence. As a fallback, we would refer you to imposing conditions, and somewhat disappointingly, despite the fact that it's my client who brought the application to review, My clients haven't been party to any of the discussions that have plainly taken place between this authority and Live Nation and some of the other neighbouring local authorities. They have been left on their own and out in the cold. But they do say that the following matters are of particular importance, and it may be helpful to take a note of precisely how I put these conditions. But firstly, noise. We propose the following condition. The maximum music noise level, defined as MNL, shall be 75 decibels LAEQ, 15 minutes outside any noise-sensitive premises, and the maximum low-frequency music noise level, that's LFMNL as a definition, shall be 85 decibels LCEQ, and again for a 15-minute period outside any noise-sensitive premises. So the key figures there are 75 LAEQ and 85 LCEQ. Those are the two key figures that we propose in the noise condition. In terms of hours of operation, we would suggest that Monday to Saturday, opening hours be lowered, and that the provision of regulated entertainment cease half an hour earlier than currently Monday to Saturday, and 1.5 hours earlier on a Sunday, because that is a school night. In terms of the supply of alcohol, we say that should start 2 hours later Monday to Saturday at midday, and we say that it should end 1 hour earlier than it presently does at 9 p.m. And then on the Sunday, we say again it should start 2 hours later at midday, rather than people getting tanked up at 10 in the morning, and it should end 2 hours earlier than it currently does. And then, so finally, in terms of opening hours, we say they should start 2 hours later, so midday, and end 1.5 hours earlier than they currently do, so that would be at 9:30 p.m. In the evening. In terms of capacity, we say there should be a maximum capacity of 10,000 ticket holders, so staff over and above that, but 10,000 ticket holders. In terms of duration, we say the licence should limit the number of events that take place in any given year to 12 days. In terms of the Safety Advisory Group, we say this should be expanded to include representatives from Hackney and Islington Council, so that all residents affected have their local representatives there for them, and that it should be a representation as those councils deem appropriate on the committee, with a representative of the licensee present at all SAG meetings. In terms of event stakeholders, we say that the Finsbury Park Event Stakeholder Group should again be expanded to include representatives from Hackney and Islington councils, and that their representations should be whatever those two local authorities deem to be appropriate, again with a representative of the licensee always present at event stakeholder group meetings. There are also some additional matters which we would ask you to look at conditioning. Those were the headline ones, but in addition to that, in relation to the park, if you bring the number of ticket holders down, we say you should bring the percentage of the park licence taken down so that it's 10%, which is commensurate with the suggestion of 10,000. In terms of policing, we say that there should be a condition increasing the number of officers to a level at which the Metropolitan Police believe is wholly adequate to deal with policing whatever the maximum capacity you set for the venue is. We would ask for stronger drug searching policy, and we would ask for water to be available as it is at concerts in Hyde Park, where there are metal troughs with several temporary plumbed-in taps for patrons to use at no charge. We would ask that cigarettes are not sold within Finsbury Park or the licensed premises, and that's essentially to stop the littering of cigarette butts as best we can. We say that the damage deposit should increase to £30,000 because we do say that damage to the park is a form of public nuisance, and that when the cost of damage repair exceeds the cost of the deposit, that's something not presently properly dealt with. We would ask that all workers are properly equipped with all suitable and necessary equipment for the safe operation of the subsequent clear-up. We would ask that the time for the build-up and tear-down of the event is limited to 5 days on either side of the period during which it takes place. We would ask that there be an inquiry if any further death is in any way linked with the event. And we would ask that conditions are enforced, not just by this authority, but that there's a requirement for some sort of enforcement engagement between all of the local authorities, Islington, Hackney and Haringey. So that is my opening. I'm grateful to you for listening to it.
Well done. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Now then, okay, thank you very much. That was considerably more than a half hour, but it was fair to listen to you, especially the proposed conditions at the end, I thought. What did you make of the fact that the Metropolitan Police didn't comment?
Well, sir, I think they do the best they can, but you'll see in the representations that you have in front of you what's been said by representatives of the Metropolitan Police at stakeholder meetings, and I'd ask you to take that into account. Ultimately, they're not the only arbiter of whether there's been crime and disorder.
Okay. Members, anything quickly on those opening remarks before we perhaps move on to some of the witnesses?
It's just a very small point. It's a very big bundle of documents, so it's just, I might have missed it. You referred to an ambulance not being able to get through. Is that in the bundle somewhere?
It is in the bundle. I will give you the reference tomorrow, if that's okay, because I don't have it to hand, but I'll get that for you.
Thank you. Councillor Crawley-Harrison.
Yeah, I just note in your application that you've marked the review relating to 2 of the licensing objectives, but you speak of, I think, 3. If you could just confirm that you're now speaking for 3 of them. And also, I'm just wondering why there's so much focus on wireless festivals specifically when obviously the case is being reviewed against Live Nation as a whole, which holds more than that single event.
Again, as you'll see in some of the representations, my clients, whilst they may have a separate political, essentially, agenda about how the park is used, don't take issue with the holding of events in the park per se, not at all. What they take issue with is the events which cause them a real problem, which we say undermine the licensing objectives, and it's wireless in particular. It falls outside of the otherwise acceptable bracket, and we say it's simply an event which doesn't need to take place.
Okay, you mentioned witnesses that you wanted to call. Are these the ones I have on the back of this? Are these the ones basically sitting?
Yes, they sit beside me. You should have witness statements from the majority of them.
Yeah.
One of them is Richard Vivian. I'll call him first. He's the acoustician.
Yes, that would be the most helpful. I want to kind of make sure everyone is very concise with their comments. We're 10 to 9 at the moment. So if we go with the Mr. Vivian, and then we'll see how we get on with the other witnesses.
Yes, sir. So you should have a copy of Mr. Vivian's report in your bundle. I'm afraid I don't have the page reference because I don't have a paginated bundle. It's 120. Good evening, Mr. Vivian. Your name is Richard Vivian and you're an expert in the assessment of noise control. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And could you first deal with the nature of your instruction in relation to this matter?
No, hold on, guys. Those two won't work at the same time, those microphones. If we could cut to the chase and Mr. Vivian could just speak to any points he wants to bring out in his report. And it's a fair it's a fair report in terms of like we would have read it and understood it. But any matters he wishes to emphasise and clarify that would be helpful for members, just speak to that, please.
Okay, thank you. As we say, my name is Richard Vivian. I'm an expert in acoustics, the assessment and control of noise. I was first approached by Tom Palin of the Friends of Finsbury Park in the summer of 2016. Mr. Palin explained that local residents suffered from high levels of noise during the Wireless Festival. I read the premises licence and noted that the existing noise conditions were unlikely to be effective in upholding the licence objective of the prevention of public nuisance. I carried out my own monitoring of the 2017 event on the Saturday afternoon and evening until the final act finished. This is detailed in my report, which you have in front of you. What was most revealing from my noise monitoring observations was that one act, which was Travis Scott, an American hip-hop artist, created noise that was very intrusive in the surrounding area. There were very high levels of bass, causing disturbance inside properties, and even causing windows on some houses to rattle. So these are sash windows on Victorian houses. And standing in the street, you can hear a number of them rattling. In contrast, the act that followed was Skepta, who is a British hip-hop artist, and that had significantly less impact on the area. They're both top-billing acts. They're playing effectively to the same audience on the same night with the same sound system, and there's no real reason why one should be so markedly different from the other. Unless, of course, the Travis Scott engineer, the first engineer, was not controlled in any way and was just allowed to do what he wanted to do. But the second engineer, Skepta's engineer, was perhaps more measured in the way that he mixed and dealt with the music programme. I immediately checked social media feeds, because this was quite an interesting thing to witness, just to see if there was something wrong with the Skepta show. Were people complaining? Was it too quiet? But I could find no comments to that effect. So I concluded that the noise conditions as they were being implemented were ineffective, allowing each visiting act and visiting engineer to do what they like. And some, of course, will be good, and some, of course, will be bad, and that will have an impact in the local community. It's also clear from the large number of recorded complaints that the current noise conditions aren't working. My recommendations were that noise conditions should apply at all noise-sensitive premises, not just a select few measurement points. The limit level should be based on an up-to-date survey of the background noise levels. And that should really primarily be based away from main roads, where the main roads corrupt the background noise surveys. And fundamentally, there must be a limit on low-frequency noise. It's crazy to sit here when all the complaints seem to be about bass and vibrations in buildings, and actually that's the one thing that's not being measured in these noise conditions. There's considerable common ground between my recommendations and the representation from local authorities. Although accepting the noise condition limit levels and locations should be updated, Live Nation was at first very reluctant to accept any low-frequency noise conditions. But as of Friday last week, that seems to have now changed, and also the papers that were released at lunchtime today. So I feel that we've successfully reached a point where all parties agree that a new and effective set of noise conditions should be produced for this event, and all parties agree that part of those noise conditions should be a control of low frequency of bass. There is one further point that I will just make about vibration, although I think Mr. Streeton covered that in his introduction. There are two sorts of vibration phenomenon that we're witnessing. One is the structural movement of buildings, and actually there's been an interesting history of that at this location, but that will be affected by the type of music, whether people are bouncing up and down in a rhythmic fashion, and of course the number of people. So if you have a large number of people, that energy that becomes structure born in the ground becomes quite significant, and that's when people start to notice swaying and movement. Smaller number of people, the effect is proportionally smaller. The other vibration, of course, is the stuff that's happening because of sound that's coming over the PA systems. So that's bass notes, if you will, that those are the things that are rattling windows. It's important to say that there's a distinction between the two. The rattling stuff is dealt with through a noise condition. People jumping up and down is just a numbers game, I suppose, and perhaps also the type of music and whether people are bouncing rhythmically. I believe they bounced very rhythmically to Madness many years ago. I'm willing to go into depth on any technical point I've raised, but respectfully suggest that well-considered and effective noise conditions on the premises licence would introduce a greater level of control for this event. By including measurement of the problem element of the audio spectrum low-frequency sound, this actually introduces more relevant and effective controls for the event organisers themselves, giving them the tools to assist in keeping visiting sound engineers under control. If you have any questions now or later in the evening, I'll do my very best to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Streeton. Who else do you want to call?
So do you want me to call all of them and then have questions of any of them? Is that the...
I mean, it's up to you to an extent. I want to give half an hour at the end to the residents, and I also want Cross from the licence. Yep.
Can I help you just a little? Which is that I think Mr. Streeton at the beginning called this a quasi-judicial hearing. Actually, it's not. It's an administrative hearing. My almost invariable practice is not to cross-examine people who choose to come here and speak to you. It's not that pleasurable to be cross-examined by a barrister. The view I take is that they've come, they should be allowed to speak, and when I make my submissions, I'll deal with anything arising. But I'm not going to, although I'm very grateful for the offer, I'm not going to be cross-examining the members of the public who want to speak to you.
That helps us immensely time-wise. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just clarify? Councillor Williams asked just now about the ambulance matter. So it's on page 676, fourth paragraph down. It was actually coming from the Islington papers. And also, Chair, I would say to read also on page 1067, which is the 2018 SAG debrief, where the London ambulance representative was able to give, some further advice. Okay.
Very good, thank you for that. Streeton.
Yes, sir. In those circumstances, I'll next call Mr. Tom Palin.
Yes, hi, I'm Tom Palin. I was the chair of the Friends of Finsbury Park in 2017. And we got Richard on board regarding a noise report for wireless that because of complaints in the past about this, how residents are being disturbed by the noise. And so we thought we'd try and get some proper evidence, really, to show this. So anyway, as you know, we got Richard involved, and I met Richard I met Richard outside Finsbury Park on one of the days of wireless, and we went to set up, I helped him carry his gear, we set up his noise recording equipment in one of the flats, right opposite Finsbury Park. And I mean, I'd just like to say, on walking through the event, and once we set the noise monitoring equipment up in the flat, it's the noise is considerable inside the flat. This is with the windows closed. Okay, these are residents, really nice place. It's a quiet, trying to have a quiet time, but they can't. Okay, and it's like this noise is thumping. It's disturbing, and this became more apparent as we walked around. And actually, probably the thing that stuck in my mind most was when we went to Wilberforce Road, to a flat in Wilberforce Road, and we went to this flat, a French couple, Vincent and Florence, and they were stressed. They were really stressed by what they were hearing, and it's like the position they were in. I was inside the flat. The windows were pumping like this, shaking in their sashes, and it's they had a very nice place. She came out of the back room. She said, "There's nowhere in this flat where it can be quiet when this festival is on." And I was standing in the kitchen, and two cups literally were chinkling against each other like this, And, you know, I thought to myself, this is crazy. And I just asked the committee to put yourself in their position. You know, imagine if you're sitting in a house in Finsbury Park during wireless and you're trying to have a quiet time. And what you're getting is this the sub-frequencies coming through, rattling the window panes and really causing you stress. And what can you do? And then, as we walked outside of the house, I could still hear the window panes rattling in houses just next to me here. And so I think, from my point of view, that really stuck in my mind. And the couple, you know, they said, we can't bear this much longer. And anyway, they've moved now. So, and it's a very sad thing. And this was, you know, I think the fact I actually witnessed this and went to someone that was living close by to the park and saw this was very, I don't know, I can't, anyone to put themselves in their position, in their flat, I'm sure you'd feel equally stressed and saddened by what's going on. Okay.
So if I could next call Mr. Christian Donato, and you'll find his statement on page 97 of your bundle.
Yeah. Hopefully it does. So I will read through the statement, just I guess for simplicity. Does it work?
Yeah, just speak a bit kind of more directionally to the mic, please. What were you saying?
I would just going to read through my statement, probably because that is a little bit simpler. I'd
I'd prefer you didn't read the whole thing out.
Okay, that's fine then. I mean,
if you want to speak emphasis points on that, rather than read the text out.
You know, it's absolutely fine. I mean, the statement that probably available to you just summarized my experience. So I'm just bringing in my experience as a resident in Finsbury Park Road, that is very nearby the park, during the Wireless Festival during 2017. So what has been brought up during this, you know, I think, representation kind of represent a lot of what I experienced. We have seen, or I've seen during that weekend, there was Friday to Sunday, a large increase of people using and abusing drugs in close proximity to the property where I live. There is a parking lot just on the side of the house, and I think, well, the picture that you've seen probably in the magazine that also is the one that I've been taking, because it became quite intimidating at that time. So police attending, there were more than 10 or 15 people in the parking lot taking gas, as well as youngers sitting in front of my house taking drugs as well. So that is one element of experience that I lived firsthand in terms of drug abuse. Second, in terms of noise, I'm lucky enough that I'm quite far down Finsbury Park Road, but still during the summer, as many others, try to enjoy their outside space, but during the time in which wireless was on, I couldn't really stay in my terrace to enjoy reading or anything that anybody would like to do during a normal day. I think the rest can be read during the statement, but pretty much summarize my experience. What I can say, this is my personal experience, but as resident, we share an internal app on the phone that report the various situations in the area. So that app, this kind of experience being quite common during those days.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. If I could next please call Lucy Cohen.
How's that? Is that good? Yeah.
Because I only got my bundle today.
So my name's Lucy Cohen. I live on the 5th floor of a flat on the Stroud Green Road, so over the Sainsbury's, and our flat is a new build, so it's not an old Victorian property, it's a brand new building. And my flat has two main living rooms in it, living room and the bedroom, and it just so happens that the layout of the flat means that both those rooms face directly onto the park, just over Stroud Green Road, with just the railway in between. And it's very difficult to convey, but we're talking about from Friday to Sunday, all your waking hours is booming bass, vibrations which are doing this to my table. And I think it's increasingly a problem because of the changes of weather system, that so I have a choice on those days. I can either shut all my windows and be at a completely unsafe temperature in my flat, or I can open my windows and I am basically at the concert. I can hear word for word the music, and I don't get to choose the playlist. So I think, I would ask the councillors, I don't know where you live precisely, you're very welcome to come and stay in my flat for the next wireless, but just to try and imagine how oppressive it is to have that level of music. And if I could just say one thing, the reason I'm not here to speak about any other event is because this is really, really different. It's the volume of the music, the effect of the bass on my living environment, and it is the nature of the energy, actually, that we have in our area as a result of that concert. So it is not a happy, celebratory, community-spirited, joyful event. This is a kind of a heavy atmosphere, and in particular, just also remember, when it finishes, it does not finish. So what happens is, because it takes a long time for people to leave, they are standing outside our flats and our houses for a couple of hours, often arguing, at least, shouting, fighting. And I live in Finsbury Park all year round. That's what I live with, and I don't come and complain about it. This is a totally unprecedented level, plus the helicopters, and you actually start to feel that you are living in a war zone for a couple of hours. So this is absolutely no exaggeration, and I have a lot better things to do on an evening, but it just felt really, really important to come and try and explain that a little bit on behalf of, I think, probably hundreds of people and thousands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cohen. You say it doesn't seem a happy event, etc. Can you think of any ones that you do think are happy events?
Well, I think the one you said you went to, and all the kind of festival feeling events, it's just really, really different. It feels antagonistic from the start. It might be because people are younger. I used to be like that when I was younger. I'm a bit less like that now. I think you've got like gangs, and I think that we just don't have any of these experiences of violence or antisocial behaviour to that degree at all. So I can't explain it, but it is just really different atmosphere. And Finsbury Park, it's like, I think there might be a sort of accusation this is NIMBYism. I just want to say one thing, that actually in Finsbury Park, most of us don't actually have backyards. The park is our backyard. And I think I think it's not part of the decision today, but I think it is such a loss to the community for quite a period of time to be together as families, to do sport, and all the stuff that makes us feel positive about living in London.
Okay, thank you very much. What's the next one, Mr. Streeton?
So, next is Alexis Skeets.
Hiya. So I'm a resident of Finsbury Park since really 2001, on and off in the area. I've been living in the flat with my partner where I am now for about 3 and a bit years. And since we've moved there, wireless has been going strong. It's become a real issue for us as we live directly opposite the park, so we get the full impact of it. The noise, the swaying buildings, the vibrations, all of this. Previous years we used to go away, exit the building for the period of wireless. I think the first year it was over a weekend. One of the years it was across 2 weekends. Now we can't do that because we have a pet, so someone has to stay home to look after the pet. We can't have anyone in our house to look after that because no one wants to stay there. My partner can't deal with the noise. She just gets anxiety attacks and has to leave. So it's becoming like I said, for everyone, a real issue. 1 year, I think I calculated it costed me in excess of £2,000 to leave our flat vacated, lost in time, work time, travel expenses, whatever else. And there's no way for us to reclaim that aside from our time. one of the big issues with this as well, and this is with all the events held in Finsbury Park, you're effectively in Haringey, and we go, what I call is the Haringey Hackney Circle. You call up Haringey to complain about noise, light pollution, antisocial behaviour, and they go, speak to Haringey. Parks, and that's their park. So you call up Haringey, and Haringey go, you're a Hackney resident, speak to Hackney. You go around in a circle, and you never ever get anything sorted. And these calls, as far as I'm aware, are all supposed to be recorded and kept on file but I don't think they ever do, because you never get reference numbers. They get outsourced to a call centre in, is it Scotland or Wales? Can't remember, somewhere out there. So no one has an idea of what's going on. The security, someone mentioned earlier about not being able to designate how many police you can have to secure the area. This year, there were a lot more security guards, police, and there was a whole action plan to sort out Seven Sisters Road. And that night of the wireless, where people urinating in front of our blocks, where people getting sick in front of our blocks, the security guards didn't do anything. When I went outside to question them, they said, don't know what you're doing. One person just flogged me off and walked away. I went to a point where there was someone who appeared to be in control of what was going on, and she just was in a panic, had no idea what was going on. Then she managed to grab a police officer, and they stood in front of our building for about 2 hours, not doing what they were supposed to be doing the security guard's job. So as many security guards as you want to get, SEER or whatever else, they can't do the job. I've even been assaulted by one of your security guards in the park one night when I went to go ask them to turn the floodlights off that flood into our flat. And when they wouldn't do it, and I asked them for their badge number to make a complaint, I got assaulted by them and 3 others who surrounded me. I made a police complaint, but the police couldn't do anything about it because there wasn't enough evidence. So I mean, that's really it from me, really. You've got my witness statement there. You can read it. It's probably got other bits in there which I've left out or forgotten. It just the I've been to not festivals. I've been to events in Finsbury Park before when I first started living here, and generally the one-day events are not bad. There's a few days set up, an event at whatever time, and then a shutdown. The festival takes out the park for like 2 weeks in advance. Then you've got a weekend, then 2 weeks of takedown, and then the park's destroyed, and then you got a week of break, and then it starts all over again. It's just rinse and repeat, and it's ridiculous. Go look at the park now. There's still damage to the park from the first wireless because it's never been repaired, and every year it gets worse and worse and worse. And as much money as the park makes, it never gets spent back in the park.
My last witness this evening is Robin Ganguly.
Hi. I think you've heard most of the points. I'll keep it brief, but I just did want to stress a few things. So first of all, I'm not a delicate flower. You know, I choose to live in central London. I don't expect countryside quiet, but what we have here is way beyond what any person should reasonably have to live through. You know, it's very loud. It's 3 days. It's the loud bass. It's aggressive music. You know, I think it's been called urban music myself, so I'm not sort of averse to the type of music, but when you have to have it forced on you for 3 days non-stop, it gets, you know, way too much. We have a young child, so I think if we didn't, then we'd probably just leave for 3 days, but it's not that easy if you have a toddler to just up sticks all day and come back. We've heard the point about the helicopter going on late at night. You know, again, if you're a parent, you know, you don't want to be kept up till midnight because then you're going to be got up very early by your child. Not really fair to have to live with that. We did call to complain about the noise, but no one bothered to come round. We said the noise is worse in the back garden. Come and have a listen. No one bothered. You know, so I query whether they're actually getting the worst noise recordings at all. Another point I made, which hasn't been covered elsewhere, I don't think, is mobile phone reception. So we couldn't get mobile reception during the festival, presumably because the transmitters were maxed out. Now, I used the landline to make my complaint, but a lot of people don't have landlines. So what if there's an emergency? What if someone needs to call the fire brigade or the police or an ambulance? They can't use their phone. You know, that can't be right in a residential area. And just, I think, a short update to my statement concerning this year's festival. It's a minor point, but we had people using our garden as a drop-off point, leaving things for their friends to collect later. As it happens, it was tickets to the festival this time, but I think we could all imagine other things being left for people, given what we've heard in the evidence.
Okay. Councillor Crawley Harrison, I think you have some questions for the witnesses.
Thank you all. My question is for Mr Vivian, if I may. I note that Vanguardia had the opportunity to respond to your report and were quite heavily critical of it, in particular about the fact that your report only covered a 3-hour window. I just would like you to clarify why that was, why you didn't cover more days, and respond to any other points that they may have raised, albeit very briefly.
Okay, thank you. Well, the reason that I didn't monitor the whole festival is that I'm working for a residents group with limited resources, so it's important that we target what we're doing here. Personally, as somebody that's involved in event noise monitoring myself, I think it would be very unfair to turn up on the very first moment of the festival when things could be in a little bit chaotic. So that would be the reason not to do the first day. And that seemed like a sensible time to come to the festival. Things should have settled down operationally. Nobody's going to complain that there's something technically wrong with the sound system or the monitoring equipment. They should be settled in, and I gathered very good representative data on that Saturday. If I hadn't have done, there's a possibility that we could have negotiated doing the Sunday as well, but I didn't need to. It was two very clear headline acts on a Saturday. One showed that the lack of control was really problematic, and the second showed that actually a more controlled act that would have complied with my suggested noise conditions didn't seem to have a negative commercial effect on the festival side.
Yep, just a follow-up question again for yourself, if I may. A couple of the residents spoke about helicopter noise. Now I'm aware, because of the times that you recorded, that you wouldn't have captured that, as I think it was clear that it came after the festival. Do you have any reference point for us of the level of noise that a helicopter could make?
The noise of helicopters would be well documented, and it's not something that I've come prepared to comment on, other than the fact it's not particularly nice noise, and I think that's all I would say about that. But I can't give you specific levels. I wasn't expecting a question on helicopters.
All right, thank you very much, everyone, on that. We're going to move on to the residents. I've got several listed here. So you guys will probably have to vacate at some point to... Oh, there's 2 seats there. Right, I can have 2. Right, okay, fair play. If you wanna stay there, then. Right, in no particular order, I've got Geraldine Timlin and Kevin Duffy.
Maybe we have page numbers. Are they available?
Yeah. Do you have that?
Yes, I do have that.
Yeah.
395 is one of them.
Yeah. 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 So we've got Geraldine Timlin and Kevin Duffy. Yeah. So page numbers of Geraldine Timlin is 395 and Kevin Duffy is 575. Okay. Ms. Timlin first, yeah? Mr. Barnfield, are you going to start setting timers for the witnesses here? Yeah, let's go for 3 minutes.
Okay, I hope you'll take into account the fact that I'm nervous addressing such an illustrious assembly.
No, not at all. You're very welcome here.
Thank you. I'm a local resident, Finsbury Park. I've lived in Adolphus Road since 1994. I've lived through the impact of wireless each year and the other major events, but particularly wireless. The noise impact, the antisocial behaviour, the vomit on our streets, the excreta that I found on our doorstep, and I have photographs to prove it. I've got a strong stomach because I have a nursing background. And the general kind of low-grade existence that we have to suffer each year is intolerable. My family won't visit when the Wireless Festival is on, and I don't like them to anyway. We've got surging crowds on the streets. When I've gone to do my shopping, I've actually been pushed off the pavement by the crowds who were not properly controlled. And later on at the so-called debriefing meeting, where there were there were Festival Republic representatives, I quoted them in my representation saying that they couldn't control that number of people, that they had inadequate security, that the promised extra security didn't actually turn up. So on top of that, I've witnessed and taken photographs of men urinating in our garden and in the garden opposite. I've come home late at night thinking I could avoid the surging crowds and actually been confronted by staggering festival goers. Everybody likes a good time, but I want to go home and enjoy the peace and tranquility of my own home. Not possible. The crowds are poorly controlled, poorly managed. Egress for, I think it was Transmission or Southport, they lost control. So there are people surging all over the streets. I'm going to summarise because of the clock. I can't see what time I've got left. I would just like to say I'd like to go away each weekend that the major festivals are on in the park. It brings a negative impact from the noise, the smelly, litter-strewn streets, the numbers of drugged, intoxicated festival goers, some of them lying on the pavement so you have to step over. And that's daytime, not even at night, because I won't go out at night. I'd like to escape the constant sirens, the wall of sound that penetrates my home. I'd like to escape having to battle through a tsunami of people on the streets. I'd like to escape from the sheer volume of 45,000 poorly controlled and poorly managed people into my neighbourhood. Sadly, I can't afford to do that. I can't afford to leave every time this festival comes on.
Thank you. I think that was a good ending point as well. And I must say, your written submission is very comprehensive and useful to the committee. So we should be rereading that thoroughly before the decision. Mr. Duffy, 3 minutes, please. Max.
Thank you. My representations are made in a personal capacity, but in the interest of transparency, I should disclose that I'm a past chair of the Friends of Finsbury Park and that I'm presently the chair of Stroud Green Ward Labour Party. You've seen my formal submissions under each of the appropriate licensing headings, and I think myself that they're pretty compelling. I'd like to address a couple of issues perhaps that might not be touched on by other people here. And I think one of the most important is that the people who are most adversely impacted are the most poor and vulnerable in our communities. They're the most disadvantaged by the noise and the loss of the park amenity. Densification, increased densification of the area around Finsbury Park, particularly with the high-rise developments near Manor House, mean that many fewer households have access to a garden, and you know that many letters have been received from families who found difficulty explaining to their children why they were effectively barred from their local park at the height of summer. Forgive me racing through a bit here because I didn't realise I'd only have 3 minutes. Social costs do not appear in any balance sheet, neither does the impact on the physical and mental health of residents who are effectively excluded from the park. And on this issue, I would like to make the point, Every communication talks about the small area of the park which is taken out of use. This is complete nonsense. The truth is that the footprint shown by wireless is not accurate, and that the whole of the park is directly impacted by the vehicles, by the noise, by the diesel, by the displacement. Right. Social exclusion is also represented by the very highly priced ticketed events, which are well beyond the means of many local communities. Speaking to my own experience, I live in an adjacent road. Every year the roads are absolutely littered with the drugs, paraphernalia and detritus. Drug dealers act with impunity. Children, I've witnessed myself on the day after the disbandment of wireless, are walking across the park when it's littered with hazardous material, very sharp metal objects, etc. I don't know how long I've got, so I'll wind up perhaps. Let me carry on. Okay, I wish to make it clear absolutely that I do not oppose and never have the holding of events in Finsbury Park. Never objected to the flower or to previous similar events. They were not disruptive on this scale, and actually they were welcome. A more important point is that Finsbury Park used to host Rise, the anti-racist festival, and also Pride. And on a number of occasions, they were community events, and they've effectively been excluded now from Finsbury Park. So I ask you to revoke this licence, not to put further conditions which will be honoured in the breach. Please, on behalf of your communities, do that now. Thank you.
Right then, let's have Elveridge Culverville and Martin Ball. Okay, three again.
Good evening.
Yeah. Point of clarification, yeah.
Can I be clear? Sorry, firstly, the two names of the people here, but whether they've made representations, that's what I want to be clear, and also where the page number is in the bundle.
Mr. Ball is on page 463. There is no representation from Mr. Culverwell.
So, as you'll be familiar, at these hearings, you only hear from people who've made representations. Nothing prevents, of course, a party calling a witness on their behalf who wants to address you. So, I understand there's no representation from the second gentleman. That's the initial issue. So, there's no right to speak in that respect unless he's called as a witness of someone else. That's my understanding. Yeah. So, I don't understand this gentleman speaking as a witness on behalf of someone else, so that leaves us in a difficult position. Well, if I could say that what underlies all of that is fairness, so not just so that everyone is aware of what people are going to speak to, and then they amplify their representations. That's just the position.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify? Mr. Culverwell did, in fact, get in touch with me, and we had an exchange of emails where I explained that if he was coming as a member of Friends of Finsbury Park, he would need to be called as their witness to speak, but he could not do it. Yeah, we're clarifying, but what I'm saying
Yes, Mr. Streeton did not call Mr. Culverwell
by the Friends of Finsbury Park because they've made the.
I mean, I do have him down as Friends of Finsbury Park, but Mr. Streeton did not call him.
I'm happy to call him out of order.
It's then down to what the gentleman is going to say and whether or not Live Nation have a proper opportunity to deal with it. So,
well, if there's
it's difficult to prejudge, of course.
Yeah, if there's objection, then.
I did agree that I would be here as Friends of Finsbury Park.
Mr. Colwell, let others.
The gentleman's got no right to speak. I do not object to him speaking. Let's have him. We've only got half an hour left. Let him say what he wants to come and say.
Thank you very much. Okay, there we go then, Mr. Colwell. And I only say that because you are a councillor, but you're not here as councillor, I understand. So that's the only reason I call you Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Eldridge Calverwell, and I've lived in Stroud Green for over 15 years. I've been a regular user of Finsbury Park for many years. I'm also the Vice Chair of the Friends of Finsbury Park, the Treasurer of Stroud Green Residents Association, a committee member of the Friends of Haringey Library, Stroud Green Library, sorry, and also a committee member of the conservation area in Stroud Green. I've been cycling in around Finsbury Park for over 8 years, Monday to Friday. Now, witnessing and embracing the serenity of the early mornings, listening to the wonderful morning chorus, and then this all being punctuated by the dirt, the destruction that is wreaked on us by the Wireless Festival over the 3 days. As I said, the festivals have also not only destroyed many lives in this in the area. When I say destroyed, they've upset their lives. They've destroyed the natural habitat of the park, and the beauty of the park is destroyed as well. And I think we mustn't override this fact that the park is being destroyed. And just a couple of weeks ago, after the festival, a colleague of mine, in fact, Mr. Carter, and I saw young children cleaning the park without protective clothing, picking up dirt with their bare hands, and I've reported this as well. The gulag-type hoardings, the trucks, the heavy-duty vehicles during the festival occupy large areas of the park. This deprives many runners, many cyclists, many keep fit enthusiasts, and mothers want to take their children to the children area in the park. And so I want to ask the committee who approves of this excessive loud noise, how long do we want to kill off nature's habitats in the park? How long do we want to kill off community opportunities of cohesion and togetherness? How long do we want to kill off the valuable calm, tranquility, and peace of our parks? How long do we want to continue prostitute the parks? When will we ever learn? When will we ever learn? Oh, when will we ever learn?
Thank you very much. Mr. Ball, please.
My name is Martin. I'm on the Management Committee of the Friends of Finsbury Park. I am also the Chair of the Friends of Down Lane Park, which is a small but far superior green space in Haringey, because it has been defended both against the plunderous economic process of Haringey Council's development agenda, but we have also been successful, the audience will please to know, in kicking out disruptive, dirty, damaging events from our park. And that is a great progress that we have made. Stop eating into my seconds. That is the great progress we have made. Yeah, I'm sure the Chair would agree as my local councillor. That is the progress we have made, and is the progress we need to make in Finsbury Park and across Haringey to protect parks, not just the beautiful places of nature, but of places, as they say, where are front gardens. I can't imagine any of the committee welcoming the damage that Finsbury Park is suffering if it happened in the leader of the council's own front lawn. If that was the state of his front lawn, he wouldn't be happy. Why is it acceptable for him and his policy to continue when actually that's what's happening to our community? All of the destruction of the park, all of the chaos, all of the shame that this policy brings on Haringey, all of the defence of the indefensible, all of our money spent on trying to say that none of these factors are relevant. Here's a long report that will stifle democracy out of this nature. What more do you need to hear? And I say it to the camera, I say it to the public as ever, who are really listening and maybe following on Twitter and looking at the photographs, that they know this licence has to end. It has to end. I don't care whether it's tomorrow. I'm a slightly patient man. I'd prefer it to end now. Really, that's the case of it. You have damaged the park. You may sit there smug, taking your council allowances that we pay, but it is our environment you are destroying. It is our private lives. I don't know if the noise gets as far as Stamford Hill, but I tell you, the noise of democracy as people come tonight and don't show any fear and intimidation of this process, and they say, enough is enough. I'm thinking of a quote that Eldridge might be better at. But enough is enough. The buck stops, whatever. Get your hands out of your pockets. Get doing something decent for this society. How much more evidence do you need? How much more time do you know that the noise is disruptive? How much more do you have to hear from people their lives are damaged? How much more poo, piss, puke does have to rain upon the community of Haringey, Hackney and Islington before actually somebody puts a stop and says, this is a disgrace. You are a disgrace. The policy disgrace. It should go, and a number of you should go with it. We want this licence to be revoked. We want our park back. That is what we are called for. That is what you as public servants should deliver to all of us. And if that clock is saying 3 minutes, I'll leave you with one thought. 4 years ago, I sat upstairs and spoke against this policy from the off. So I'm a bit of a veteran in this, and I only got 3 minutes then, so I better be short. But actually, it is time then for it to end, and it's time now. Give us the decent public service that you are paid to provide. Give us our park back. Give us the quality of our lives. Stop interfering with the park. Stop damaging people's lives.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Right then, I have Sonny Johnson and I have Daniel Northam-Jones. Thank you. Follow that, lads. $355 for Mr. Johnson and Mr. Jones is $358. Okay, Mr. Johnson first, just because it's first on my list.
My name is Sonny Johnson. I have only lived in Finsbury Park for approximately 2 years. I live on Finsbury Park Road, which is easily viewable. The entrance to Finsbury Park on Seven Sisters Road, we can literally see it out of our window, so we are a matter of metres away from the park. A lot of what we've heard today echoes in my mind exactly the problems that people are talking about. We witness. It's an awful time. I am also not averse to going to festivals. I regularly attend Notting Hill Carnival, where I feel safe, where I feel it's a credit to London. I feel it's a community-spirited event. However, for me, wireless is at the crux of what is wrong with the events in Finsbury Park. For me, the tragedy, not my own suffering. I am a first-year teacher in a nearby primary school. I'm very proud to serve my community. And what is very tragic for me is when I hear 8-year-old children telling me that they are too frightened to go into Finsbury Park, where parents are worried about our sports day being held in Finsbury Park. Now, of course, wireless isn't the sole reason for this. It's the nature of the park. It's because we don't have community-spirited events. We have things like wireless, where it's essentially used, we've heard enough about that, I have to say. It's turned our park into a no-go zone. I mean, I myself, when I go to Clissold Park, makes me proud to be a Londoner that we have such wonderful public spaces. And I think I'm speaking for hundreds of people who aren't making representations, who aren't able or knowledgeable in how to go about this process. Because the children who I work for, they live on the housing estates around the park. Their local park is Finsbury Park. They don't have gardens, and they live in places which many of us wouldn't dare go to, let alone live in. Now, the fact that they aren't able to go into their local park and play football safely, a park where people have been murdered and raped, I think is a symptom of the park being used as this dustbin for all these awful festivals. And I personally believe that revoking the licence for this event is the only thing you can possibly do, because if you don't set a precedent for this type of activity in our park, it's a very, very slippery slope, and people have left the area, and I myself would consider leaving, and it's a horrible thing for me to think about, having to leave, because it's just such a horrible place to live at the moment. And we love it when you've got the Arsenal supporters coming in, even the Queens of Stone Age festivals. It's a totally different vibe. It's a totally different thing. The fairground, the circus, attracts families. The wireless, it feels like we are living in a dystopian nightmare for 3 or 4 days. It's like The Purge.
No advertisement for a film intended there, I'm sure. Mr. Jones, Mr. Johnson, if you could just turn your mic off.
Thank you, Chair. I live on Seven Sisters Road, very close to our friend here in Brownswood Ward. I just credit the attendance here of Councillors Potter and Selman from Hackney Council. They've been terrific advocates for this cause. The real problem with wireless is the size of the event and the density of the surrounding area in which it operates. I'm going to talk about 2 of the licensing objectives, which I also raise in my written submission. I went to central London the morning of Saturday wireless and came back and witnessed rampant drinking on the tube, which is not allowed. I reported it to TfL staff at Finsbury Park Station, and they said, "What do you want me to do about it?" I said, "Go and talk to the police," and they just sort of shrugged. "There's nothing at all we can do about this." I also experienced laughing gas for sale outside Lidl on Seven Sisters Road and also by the Tube. I pointed it out to 2 police officers. The first was rushing to another incident. I then reported it to a parked police van on Alexandra Grove, who sort of shrugged his shoulders and said, "We're only going for serious violent crime from gangs." And so low-level drug dealing was sort of permitted tacitly in a totally understandable prioritisation of resources at the most grievous crimes, but there's a climate of disorder and lawlessness which descends on Finsbury Park during Wireless Festival. Secondly, I want to talk about public nuisance. The park is closed for 22 days because of Wireless Festival. Huge barriers put up because these guys will not quicken up. They put events on consecutive weekends with big takedown. 22 days it's closed. It's a quarter of the park, a huge amount of space. It required 3 park runs to be cancelled. Like Eldridge, I run round the park in the morning. 3 park runs were cancelled because of this, 22 days. The council only say it's only 27% of the park. It's the 27% where I live, and if I took out 27% of my flat, it'd have a pretty big impact on the remaining 73% as well. During the festival, people have talked about the earthquakes that you get in your flat, also about the noise levels being deeply disruptive. I want to talk about the swearing. At 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon this year, it was not just in the songs, it was in the between songs. One performer, I'm afraid my language will be rude here, repeatedly told the crowd to make some motherfucking noise at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday. The council's constantly tweeting that the three-quarters of the park still open, lots of nice pictures of the children's playground on a Sunday, middle of a Sunday afternoon, repeatedly make some motherfucking noise. It's a disgrace. My overall point is you cannot run this festival, a festival of this size and of this nature, in a densely populated area. It doesn't work.
Thanks, gents. I've got Clive Carter, and then I have visiting councillors, Selman and Potter. Is that right? Yeah. Are you Yeah, so yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. Yeah, if we take Mr. Carter now and then have the 2 councillors together, then we should get through it. Mr. Carter, formerly of this parish. Welcome back. 3 minutes.
Good evening.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Chair. Hello, Committee. My name's Clive Carter. I'm a former councillor. I'm on one of the trustees of the Friends of Finsbury Park. I've also been on the licensing committee for the last 4 years, which is very interesting. I'll try to be brief. You've got my submission at 6 pages. I find it difficult to follow in the wake of our star turn, Mr. Martin Ball here, but one small anecdote for you is that Martin and I walked taking photographs of rubbish, litter in the park after the clear-up. Now, we went to the areas where the clear-up did not happen. It was absolutely filthy on the western side, abutting the railway line, where people had clearly been sleeping rough during the concert, I think, and it was a truly disgusting sight, and not many people would get to go there. When I was alone taking photographs in the build-up to Wireless of the fence, of the 12-foot high steel wall, on the, I went right back to the far eastern side of the park, adjacent to Seven Sisters Road. I was clearly taking photographs. A woman came down and I explained what I was doing, and when I said that I was taking photographs of the build-up, she kind of, she was beside herself with anger. She was, I don't know her name, but I can tell you from my own direct personal experience that she said she was an accident and emergency nurse on night shift, and this was wrecking her life. Now, I just hope no one here in this room or in the public gallery needs the attention of an A&E nurse in the middle of the night whose sleep has been wrecked. She was beside herself. I confessed I was a previous Haringey councillor, and I don't think that that sort of assuaged her concerns. I have a letter here. The writer may be in the audience tonight. Because we get stuff at the Friends of Finsbury Park. What?
Mr. Carter, legal wants to come in. If you could just turn your mic off.
Yep.
Yep.
Can I just be clear? Are you going to read from a new letter? Have we seen this letter? Is it in our papers? So I think you said you have a 6-page representation. Is that right?
Yes, I've made a 6-page representation. This letter, I don't think you have had it. It mentions a 10-year-old daughter who can't get to sleep from a mother.
Mr. Carter, legal need to advise on that, please. If you could turn off, if you could turn off your mic, please.
Yep.
New documents should not be tabled at this hearing unless all the parties agree. And we have enforced that with Mr. Streeton's speaking note. The same applies really to this letter.
Thank you very much. That is very clear. You can do without, Mr. Carter.
I'll leave that letter aside. I've mentioned the nurse.
Yes, he was motioning that he very much did.
Can I continue with some other stuff?
In what you have left.
Well, it's about the scrutiny meeting, which considered this business some while ago, and it had to do with tobacco sales. I would just, it goes to the point that was mentioned earlier by the barrister about bias. There has been tobacco sales on a big scale at Wireless. We heard from the licensing officer, it may have been me who asked the question or somebody else. There was nothing that could be done about it. However, I remember distinctly that Mr. Simon Farrow, I think, was more on the money when he said that it was not, that he implied there was something that could be done about it and it was a matter for councillors rather than some sort of contractual obligation. So that did stick in my mind. There are many other things I could say about the stakeholder group, but I suspect you're going to rule me out of time. Is that right?
Only the time will tell. There's an alarm that goes off. I'm not going to rule you
How
out.
much more time have I got?
Well, you can see this. It's hurriedly going towards zero. You have very little time left.
The stakeholder group has been a sop and a lightning rod which was supposed to absorb the criticisms over the last 4 years and to implement corrective measures. It has been nothing of the sort. It has failed. For example, I'll give you an actual example. David Lammy MP accompanied a group of us onto what he dubbed the Serengeti. This was an area of land that was so impacted by the events, it was bare. That was his description. Now, at a stakeholder group meeting, that was brought up, and it was accepted that that area was vulnerable to trampling down.
Mr. Carter.
They took that on board. The following year, protective matting was put down.
Good.
That was good. The next year, it was gone.
Actually, that was very useful. Right then, we've got Councillor Selman and Councillor Potter. Welcome to Haringey. Thank you for coming. Same as the rest. 3 minutes each, please. Thank you all.
I'll be very brief. A lot of what has been said I support in terms of the impact it has on Brownswood residents. I'd like to thank the Brownswood people that have come here today to give representations. It's very true, I think what Sonny was alluding to, that there is many more people who do not complain, who simply put up. As part of my work as a local ward councillor, I go and knock on doors repeatedly every single year, and there are a lot of vulnerable people who just put up with things and do not complain. So the general mood in Brownswood, with the increase in events, the kind of size of events and the impact that they have on residents' lives, the general mood is much more anti-events progressively as time has gone on. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of other points. We really appreciated the chance that Festival Republic gave us this year to work on some of the issues, but it still doesn't get away from the underlying fact that the event is huge and really does impact. There were certain days when the security was in place as promised, and it was a lot. The ASB and some of the crime and disorder issues were addressed, but when there were reasons that the stewards were pulled away for other priorities, or there wasn't enough stewards in place, because I think they'd have difficulties getting enough stewards on 1 or 2 days, and Brownswood residents being on the front line suffer from the impact. So I don't think you can get away, no matter what controls are put in place. There are occasions when the impact on Brownswood residents is far too great. So I believe that the licence should be revoked. And that the type of events, the size of the events, if events go forward, should be a lot less than they are currently. I'd like to pass on to my colleague.
Thanks. I won't repeat much of what's been said about the impact on residents given the time, but I did want to emphasise that, in my opinion, that impact is real. And I say that both from the perspective of having been out on the nights over the course of the events, and also from having listened to a number of residents, both in terms of correspondence and at very well-attended public meetings. That said, as Councillor Potter did allude to, this year in particular, the engagement from Festival Republic was much better, and there are a number of people here and also within the stewarding company who did genuinely listen to concerns of residents and put in place improved practical steps. I think our concern is that even with those steps in place, there are still concerns that remain in terms of the impact on residents. I wanted to make some very specific points, which is, depending on what the decision is about making sure that any of those measures and recommendations are embedded in the licence condition as actual conditions. But I guess really what my final sort of position and point on that would be, which is that even where all of that stuff is in place, I think serious consideration has to be given to the ability to safely host an event of this kind in a very dense residential area of the size and magnitude, in particular including some of the hours on Sunday evenings. We heard earlier about some of the language in the late and the music going on quite late when people have to get up the next day to go to school or work, and I think the impact then is particularly notable. So thank you for giving us the time to speak tonight, and I just hope that you take that into account. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Right, then we've heard quite a lot of evidence tonight. I intend to bring the meeting to a close, this part of the meeting. As you'll know, there is a second part of this meeting scheduled for tomorrow at the same time, probably running to the same time as well. And at that point, we'll be taking into consideration the opposite view from the licence holder, and there will be much more. There will be much more in the way of questioning.
Sorry, just one point, actually. You've heard from a number of residents and indeed councillors. If you had any questions for them, now might be the opportunity, or do you want them to come back tomorrow?
I've canvassed my colleagues.
So no questions. I'm great.
I've canvassed my colleagues. I think basically the thinking is that across what we've seen, the barrister has a good grasp of the issues and noise, and I assume Finsbury Park people, Friends of Finsbury Park people, reps will be back here tomorrow. Is that correct? Yeah? Okay. So I think the feeling was that in the round, what we've seen, these central characters here at the front can probably answer all our questions on that. Right, then the meeting is closed, so have a good evening, and see many of you tomorrow.